on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie tonight, 9 till 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubs and Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 12 o'clock on Tuesday, 23rd of January.
Houthi rebel strikes will go live to the Commons imminently, where the Prime Minister will brief MPs after the UK joined the US in carrying out more joint airstrikes in the Yemen last night. But is there a risk of escalation? And is our military equipped for a prolonged campaign?
The Lords have their say. The unelected chamber has been accused of acting against the will of the people as peers attempt to torpedo Rishi Sunak's Rwanda plan. Is it time to abolish the House of Lords?
And the mooch speaks out. Donald Trump's former White House communications chief sensationally declares he's backing Joe Biden over his old boss to win the US presidential election. Anthony Scaramucci will join us live for exclusive insight into a possible second Trump term and what it might mean for Britain. Yes, well, we're going to be hearing from the Prime Minister at around 12:30 in the House of Commons. He's going to be giving a statement to his colleagues, his parliamentary colleagues, about what happened.
They've been demanding one, haven't they? Starmer kicking up a fuss, saying that they weren't briefed this morning.
Yes, yes. Well, he had one of his MPs doing the rounds this morning, and she suggested that Keir Starmer was not told about these strikes in advance.
But should he be told? Can the government not just get on with its business and then address Parliament as he's doing now at midday? And also Starmer, just a few weeks ago, pottering around Estonia in a military jacket, playing Prime Minister. I mean, is that what we want from the Leader of the Opposition? Can't you wait your turn?
And presumably he was told before the first round of strikes, and it's been made clear that if the Houthis don't back down, then strikes will continue. Can the government reasonably brief the opposition every time they strike down these rebels?
Well, Sunak's address in Parliament in, 29 minutes? So join us live for that. I'm also looking forward to Anthony Scaramucci, Donald Trump's former White House communications chief. Once a Trump loyalist, said he loved the former president, now says he's going to back Joe Biden if Trump wins the nomination.
Can you believe that?
He used to, I mean, I'll ask him when we speak to him, but the mooch, as he's called, used to say he was Trump's biggest loyalist, but clearly not.
And now he seems to be Trump's biggest enemy, political enemy. Anyway, thank you very much. Well, headlines with Tatiana.
Emily, thank you very much and good afternoon. These are your top stories from the GB newsroom. A mass screening of more than 300,000 police officers, staff and volunteers has led to 9 criminal investigations. The review, which was carried out in the wake of Sarah Everard's murder by a serving officer, uncovered 461 cases in need of assessment. Most of the officers were ranked chief inspector or below, but one chief officer was found to need management action. One case involved alleged sexual offences, while another was due to claims of drug offences. There were also 2 accusations of fraud. A man who killed 3 people in a spate of attacks in Nottingham has had his not guilty plea accepted on the grounds of diminished responsibility due to mental illness. 32-year-old Valdo Calacane, also known as Adam Mendes, instead pled guilty to manslaughter in November. He killed university students Barnaby Webber and Grace O'Malley Kuma and school caretaker Ian Coates in June last year. He also admitted trying to murder 3 pedestrians who were hit by a van on the morning of the attacks. British strikes on Houthi targets in Yemen are designed to send a clear message, that's according to the Foreign Secretary. British aircraft used precision-guided bombs to strike several targets near an airfield in the capital, Sana'a. The UK and the US have been patrolling areas in the Red Sea after a spate of attacks on commercial ships by Iranian-backed militants. The leader of the Lib Dems, Red Davey, said it was deeply disappointing that the strikes were launched without a debate in Parliament. But Lord Cameron says the UK is following its words with strong action.
What the Houthis are doing is unacceptable, it's illegal, and it's threatening the freedom of navigation. That's why we've taken the action. Alongside that action is a whole set of measures we'll be taking, including sanctions and other pressure to put on the Houthis, combined, of course, with the action the Royal Navy is taking with others in the Red Sea. And we'll be building the strongest coalition of support to back the steps that we've been taking.
Another storm sweeping across Britain, bringing fresh disruption for commuters just a day after Storm Isha. The Met Office says Storm Jocelyn will bring strong winds with amber and yellow alerts issued for much of the country. Yellow warnings for rain and ice are also in place across northern and eastern parts of Scotland. TransPennine Express is among several train operators warning of disruption. It's urging passengers to avoid travelling between England and Scotland from 3 o'clock this afternoon. Rishi Sunak says the UK will work with Belgium to combat people smuggling gangs as he welcomed the country's Prime Minister to Downing Street. Alexander De Croo praised Britain as a good neighbour, with the 2 leaders pledging to tackle illegal migration with increased cooperation. The Belgian leader said he looked forward to working with the UK in what he described as a first-of-a-kind law enforcement partnership. Meanwhile, Lord Cameron's urging his fellow peers to get behind the government's push to send asylum seekers to Rwanda. They voted last night in favour of pausing the plan until ministers can prove Rwanda is a safe destination. Britain's treaty with the Central African nation is a key part of its plan for asylum claims to be processed outside of Britain. The bill would compel judges to regard Rwanda as a safe country. Royal Mail has been charging customers £5 to get their post after senders unknowingly bought fake stamps from some post offices. An investigation by GBNews found books of stamps bought directly from post offices and some local supermarkets were found to be counterfeit. Those affected are now being forced to pay 4 times the cost of a standard first-class stamp. The Post Office says it receives stamps directly from Royal Mail. A spokesperson for Royal Mail told GB News it has a robust process for verifying stamps, and anyone who thinks they've been incorrectly charged should contact them. And 2 million people could have their gas and electricity cut off this winter because they can't afford to pay their bills. Citizens Advice says it's concerned over the affordability of essential services. That's after Ofgem announced power companies will be allowed to resume forcibly installing prepayment meters in some households. Those are your top stories on GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying Play GB News. Now back to Ben and Emily.
Now, Britain and the US launched fresh attacks against the Houthi rebels in Yemen overnight as the militant group continues to attack commercial and military shipping in the Red Sea.
Yes, so justifying the latest round of airstrikes, Foreign Secretary Lord Cameron said that Britain and the US want to send the clearest possible message that their words will be backed by action. But Iran, which arms and funds the Houthi rebels, condemned the strikes as a strategic mistake.
Now, for more on this, let's speak to GB News security editor Mark White, who has some breaking news for us. Mark.
Yeah, this is the Maritime Trade Operations Centre. It's effectively run by the Royal Naval Reserve, and it's all designed to alert shipping in areas like the Red Sea of potential threats. They are reporting that a number of aerial drones have been spotted in the Red Sea, southwest off the Yemen coast, and shipping in the area is on alert, being told to look out for anything suspicious and, of course, to report to the maritime authorities if they see anything. The real concern here, of course, is that given these strikes last night, the Houthi rebels continue with the strikes that have been taking place in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden for months now, and certainly since those strikes that the UK first took part in on the 11th of January. We heard from the British government then that those strikes were intended to be limited and proportionate, but since then there have been a dozen separate strikes on shipping in that area by the Houthi rebels in defiance of this bloody nose that they received from the UK and the US back on the 11th of January. The US have responded with smaller scale strikes in recent days, but now the UK is back and involved, sending those 4 typhoons from RAF Akrotiri in Cyprus on a 3,000 plus round trip down to Yemen to target, we're told, targets around the main airfield in the Yemen capital, Sana'a, taking out Houthi installations there that were involved, we're told, in sending missiles towards those ships.
Thank you for bringing us that breaking news. Should we be sceptical that the Houthi rebels will back down, will cease their assaults on shipping routes as a result of this retaliatory attacks from the US and the UK? Will they back down?
Yeah, I think we should be very sceptical of anything that they do. But what we know about the Houthis is that they are, battle-hardened, belligerent after years of being pummeled by a very significant military in the form of Saudi Arabia. The Saudi Arabians had to realise that they're not going to be able to bomb the Houthis into submission, and that conflict is effectively paused. So even though these strikes were carried out with the full intention by the US and the UK that would be it, that the Houthi rebels would get the message and desist from attacking these vessels in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden, it's clear that the Houthis are not doing that. And in fact, they've made numerous public statements to say that they will continue and not just target ships which they say have been linked to Israel, but actually to widen that out now to include ships that have a link to the US and the UK, because the US and the UK struck them militarily.
So what you're saying is this clear message that Lord Cameron says this retaliatory action is giving may not work, may have no effect.
No, I mean, I think Lord Cameron, in his interview this morning as well, in his own words, he acknowledged that the reason why the UK is back shoulder to shoulder with the US and carrying out strikes again overnight is because the Houthis have not got that message. They're not prepared to listen and stop their attacks. There have been a dozen such attacks since the 11th of January, and therefore the UK is continuing its operation alongside the US to degrade the Houthis. But I guess the issue is now, where do we go in the longer term? Are we being sucked in to a much deeper conflict? If the Saudis couldn't do it over a number of years, are we talking about airstrikes and maritime strikes that are taking place over not weeks but months and maybe even into years? That is going to have a cost that will be felt by the US and by the UK in the months and years ahead, if that is the case.
Yeah, it's important to remember that the Houthis aren't just some ragtag militia running around with AKs on the Yemeni coast. They're a proper outfit who, as you said, Mark, they withstood a considerable bombing campaign from the Saudis and other partners in the Middle East some years ago. Mark White, thanks very much for that. We're going to cross now to former Chief of the Air Staff at the RAF, Sir Michael Graydon, who joins us live. Good morning, Sir Michael. Is it still the case that we're not equipped, really, for a scrap in the Red Sea? Our aircraft carriers are still languishing in Portsmouth, aren't they?
Well, we're using what we've got available at the moment, and possibly working with the Americans is the way ahead here. It's a very difficult one. I mean, just picking up some of the points that were made with your earlier conversation, I think we have to be careful that we don't, as it were, look at the Saudi operation, which had a root in political dimensions, as opposed to what we are doing with coalition partners. It's not just the Americans and ourselves. Everybody who has an interest in trade passing through the Suez Canal is involved in. So what we are doing is trying to say to the Houthis, you cannot intercept and attack in free water ships that are bound to go through the Suez Canal. And I think that is a more restricted aim, and therefore one that is more possible, although I share your view that it's going to be quite some time before, if ever, it is successful. I think it's worth also saying, if I may, that, and it's a comment I thought was extremely apt, that the performance of the Royal Air Force people was, as the Chief of Air Staff, current Chief of Air Staff said, both proportionate, both precise, and both professional. And I think that's something we need to keep in mind. Proportionality and precision and professional is surely something we should be really quite proud of.
Do you get the impression that if a resolution is found between Israel and Gaza, the ongoing war there, that the Houthi rebels would cease their assaults on shipping lanes, or is this much bigger than that?
I think that's up to Iran. Iran has got its sticky fingers very much involved in this. And the question which those closer to it than me will be asking themselves is just how far is Iran prepared to go in this direction? I think the general wisdom at the moment is that she doesn't really want to get into a fight with America directly, which is, of course, always in the background. So the answer, I think, to your question is, if Iran feels that it wants to continue, can take the risks, then it will continue. But if Iran starts backing away from that, then the Houthis are going to run out of capability probably quite quickly.
What do you make of the fact that there are arguments that we're still giving money to Ukraine? Rishi Sunak, of course, was there a few weeks ago giving another £2.5 billion in military aid, yet we seem really a bit ill-equipped to deal with this situation unless we're on the coattails of the United States. Is there an argument there that we shouldn't be giving money to Ukraine whilst our own armed forces are quite considerably depleted?
Yes, we absolutely should. This is an existential fight in Europe, and it affects us in many ways a lot more than what is happening in that Middle East part of the world. The reality is that we have for a long time not had stock levels which would be demanded for a conventional war, and we're now being found out on that score. I hope that the message is very clear to our politicians that we need to look very carefully at whether we are seriously capable of conducting a conventional war. And in the meantime, we must support Ukraine because they're fighting a battle for us, for democracy, for Europe and the free world.
So Michael, I mean, let's get to it really. I mean, the real concern of people watching and listening to this show will be the fear of escalation. What are the chances of this escalating further into a war, essentially?
I don't think it will escalate into war unless Iran deems that a war is in their interest, and I cannot see it being in their interest. We're talking about the United States, which is immensely powerful and is capable of doing a huge amount of damage if they deemed it necessary in Iran. And I don't think Iran is ready for that. So escalation, I don't see that as being an immediate problem. I mean, who knows, things happen. But I'd come back to really where a lot of this is stemming from is, of course, the Israel and Palestinian tragedy that is ongoing at the moment. And I hope very much that something can be done to stop the warfare there and to sit down and try and talk about a future way ahead in that part of the world, which I think will then rebound to advantage in the Gulf.
Yes, we're hearing we're hearing that potentially Israel would allow a 2-month ceasefire if all hostages are released. So that might be a step in the right direction if that could be concluded, if that could be agreed. Thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it. Sir Michael Graydon, former chief of the air staff at the RAF.
But I think it was Lord Cameron who said that he didn't think really at the heart of this situation in the Red Sea that it was down to Israel or Gaza. He thinks that it's Iran using it as an excuse to cause trouble.
That's what Iran does.
Well, yeah. And also, I'm interested to speak to Anthony Scaramucci later in the show, Donald Trump's former White House comms chief. I want to ask him about the fact Joe Biden unfroze around $6 billion of Iran's assets in November, and then a few weeks later, the situation in the Red Sea heats up. I want to know what he thinks of that. Was Biden possibly partly to blame for this kicking off? So,
well, yes, definitely. I'll be looking forward to hearing what he has to say, what Anthony Scaramucci has to say to that. But coming up shortly, we'll be live in the House of Commons because Rishi Sunak will be giving a statement on the latest round of joint airstrikes. Don't go anywhere. You're watching Good Afternoon Britain on GB News.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's tonight, 9 till 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubs and Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, yesterday we were reporting on Storm Isha and all the destruction there and the travel chaos, and now the UK is bracing for the 10th named storm of the season. That's as high winds and rain of Storm Jocelyn make their way across the country.
Was it Isha or Isha, did we decide in the end?
I think we decided Isha, although I think I called it Isha most of the show.
The Met Office has issued a danger to life alert across parts of Scotland. That's due to flying debris, and there's other smaller warnings ready for northern parts of England as well. Let's cross live to our Northern Ireland reporter, Doogie Beattie, who hopefully hasn't been blown away just yet. You still there, Doogie?
I am indeed. I've been very wet this morning, it must be said, and this road in particular this morning was completely blocked by a tree. We've been with the electricity service today and having a look at how they're reconnecting homes. But really, when this all boils down to the very bottom of the problems that you have when a storm comes in. There are much bigger problems. Number one, we look at maintenance of trees like this along the sides of roads and what happens when they come down. Now, when they cleared this tree from here, if I could just get the camera to point in here, you will see in the root of that tree in there is concrete pipes. And those concrete pipes are what takes the water away from the side of the roads. And of course, they are the gullies of the road and stop flooding happening at a later date. And of course, now that will also have to be repaired and looked after. But, you know, it just shows you the sort of expense that a council area will go to and how services have to work alongside each other, and maybe what happened in that 2-year lockdown period when general maintenance wasn't being done on such evergreens as this. Of course, they are evergreen, they're full of water, so they're very heavy, they're great for breaking the wind and shelter, but of course when the wind catches them they act like a massive sail and come down and cause problems with the electricity service, with road service when they are trying to reconnect these areas. And of course our services in Northern Ireland at this moment in time, especially around forestry and so forth, are on strike, which means that this morning the electricity board had to come in here with a 9-ton digger and basically instead of cutting the tree up totally, they have pushed it to the side of the road because they aren't qualified and it's not their job to be doing that. It is their job to run power to the areas that unfortunately have been left without. And we are looking now at another heavy wind warning for tonight coming back into Northern Ireland and heading into Scotland.
Goodness me, so those power outages could be prolonged, Doogie.
Yes, very much so. These electricity workmen here are really, they are, and I've said this all along, they're experts at doing this because Ireland as a whole, north and south, the teams work very closely together and they're well practiced at this and well rehearsed at it. But when they've been caught in one side, especially with strikes with their partners, and then another storm coming in at the back of it, it will cause further problems. And of course, people don't like to hear this, but electricity services, water services, they put real emphasis on keeping the main population running, and those in the rural countryside will suffer because of it.
Well, thank you very much indeed for your time, Doogie Beattie in Northern Ireland. Wish the best to those people out there without any power. Not good at all. But we're going to be hearing in the next few moments from the Prime Minister. He's going to be giving this statement to the House of Commons on the strikes overnight.
What's he going to say?
Well, what's he going to say? Presumably he's going to detail what happened, and then he'll be telling us that they were successful and that the government will continue on.
Do you suspect the Labour front benchers will be getting a bit rowdy over the fact they claim they weren't briefed on last night's strikes, despite ministers doing the rounds this morning saying they were briefed? So who's telling the truth?
Well, who is telling the truth? Both can't be true, can they?
No, I mean, I suspect it was probably a case of a bit in the middle. They were told perhaps a couple of minutes after the strikes, maybe Labour and Starmer wanted a full briefing before the strikes. But my argument, and that of a lot of our viewers as well, you're emailing in the inbox, is why should the opposition be given a running commentary of everything the government does? And I mentioned earlier, this comes off the back of Starmer play-acting as PM a couple of weeks back in Estonia, doing a tour of, was it an RAF base?
Well, apparently it is protocol to brief the opposition when there is a military operation underway. OK, fine. But this is a continued strike action against the Houthi rebels, as there's already been a first round, hasn't there? So it doesn't seem necessarily that is the right or necessary thing to do. But shall we speak to Conservative MP Sir Robert Buckland? Robert, thank you very much for joining us on the show. We're about to hear from the Prime Minister. He's going to give his statement on what's happened overnight. Tell us, what is he likely to say? Has this action had the desired effect?
Well, I think the Prime Minister is going to explain the basis for the action. I think he's rightly come to Parliament to outline what I think was the very clear legal basis for taking this strike against a group of gangsters, frankly, who are seeking to hold not just parts of Yemen to hostage, but the entire Red Sea seaway. And, you know, that's so important for world trade. It's important for our trade. It's important for the wider world as well. And I think, you know, once again, the UK, the US and other partners are, if you like, acting as police officers trying to deal with a problem that threatens, I think, the economic well-being of millions and millions of people. Why should these gangsters hold the rest of us to ransom? They've no legitimacy. They're not an elected government. They're a bunch of terrorists.
Is it just Britain and the US here launching these retaliatory attacks, or are our European neighbours joining in too?
You know, there's support from the Dutch and other countries as well. And I think increasingly it's important that NATO members, other European countries also not just show solidarity, but demonstrate that through logistical support and indeed direct involvement in this type of action. You know, we should be confident as representatives, if you like, of the rule of law and the importance of maintaining international shipping lanes to take action where necessary. And I'm glad that the Prime Minister and the Americans have shown resolution here. They've looked at the evidence. It's clearly a legal justification. There's a strong concern about shipping and the danger to shipping, and we're taking action, and it's only right that we do.
So, Robert, so let's have the truth then. Were Labour briefed this morning or not? Who's telling porkies?
I don't know. Look, I do know that senior opposition figures as Privy Councillors are entitled to a briefing on what we call Privy Council terms. That's secret terms. But there's a world of difference, I think, as you pointed out, between briefing on an initial action and then what was the clear understanding that we were going to have to continue to take action, bearing in mind the fact that the Houthis don't seem to want to back down. And I must say that all this sort of noise about, you know, Parliament having to approve these actions, I don't agree with that at all. If you're going to be fleet of foot and defend national interests, you've got to use the power that you have as a government, which is what we call the prerogative power, you know, the government's power to do that. And I think that, you know, attempts by Parliament to try and insist on a vote every time the government does anything like this are misplaced and will actually weaken our security.
Yeah, so Robert, the Prime Minister, he won't be too pleased with the House of Lords this morning. He said he plead to the House of Lords, saying don't frustrate the will of the people when it comes to the Rwanda bill, but his plan has suffered its first parliamentary defeat. What do you say to that, really? Are the House of Lords obstructing the will of the people here?
Well, the vote yesterday wasn't binding. It doesn't relate to the bill itself. I think that they're making a point that they want to make sure that the law matches reality. I don't actually have a problem with that. You know, I want our friends in Rwanda to get on with implementing all the measures that they've agreed under the treaty. I think it's important we do that so that we can avoid any more legal wrangles. And I do hope that when the bill comes to the Lords, they don't obstruct the bill itself. They're entitled to revise and put down amendments, but I think trying to block the bill would be a big mistake from the unelected House.
Conservative MP Sir Robert Buckland, thank you for joining us. Very much appreciated. We are going to go live to the Commons very shortly with Rishi Sunak's statement to Parliament on last night's strikes. We'll be with that very shortly. First, though, let's go to your headlines with Tatiana.
Ben, thank you very much and good afternoon. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. Unmanned aerial drones have been spotted in the Red Sea off the coast of Yemen, according to the UK Maritime Trade Operations Centre. Shipping in the area is now being put on alert. That comes after a joint strike by the UK and US on Houthi targets in Yemen overnight. Foreign Secretary Lord Cameron said the strike was an act of defence. We can now take you live to the House of Commons, where the Prime Minister is due to give a statement on those attacks in Yemen.
Including in intelligence, an ongoing and imminent threat from the Houthis to UK commercial and military vessels and to those of our partners in the Red Sea and wider region. I told the House last week that we would not hesitate to respond if the acts continue in order to protect innocent lives and preserve the freedom of navigation. And that is what we have done. We acted alongside the United States with support from Australia, Bahrain, Canada and the Netherlands. We acted on the same basis as the 11th of January, fully in line with international law, in self-defence and in response to a persistent threat. And as with the first wave, the strikes were limited to carefully selected targets with maximum care taken to protect civilian lives. Mr. Speaker, attempting to counter every Houthi attack after it has been launched is simply not sustainable. We have already shot down dozens of missiles and drones targeted at civilian vessels and at the Royal Navy. And the Houthis have conducted at least 12 further attacks on shipping since the 11th of January, including just last night, shortly before our strikes were conducted. So we acted to further degrade their ability to mount such attacks. Last week, I gave the House our initial assessment of the first wave of strikes. Since then, we have seen further evidence that they were successful in degrading the Houthis' military capability. Last night, we hit 2 military sites just north of Sana'a, each containing multiple specific targets, which the Houthis used to support their attacks on shipping. And Mr. Speaker, I want to be very clear. We are not seeking a confrontation. We urge the Houthis and those who enable them to stop these illegal and unacceptable attacks. But if necessary, the United Kingdom will not hesitate to respond again in self-defence. We cannot stand by and allow these attacks to go unchallenged. Inaction is also a choice. With that in mind, Mr. Speaker, and given the persistent nature of the threat, it was important to update to the House again today. I listened carefully to honourable and right honourable members last week, and so we will give the House a chance for a full debate on our broader approach in the Red Sea tomorrow. Mr. Speaker, we took extensive steps to address this threat to international security before taking military action. We launched Operation Prosperity Guardian in December with over 20 other countries. The international community issued repeated statements on the 1st of December, the 19th of December, the 3rd of January, the 12th of January, condemning the attacks and urging the Houthis to desist. On the 10th of January, the United Nations Security Council passed a resolution demanding that they stop the attacks. And I think it is important to note also that the internationally recognised government of Yemen has also condemned the Houthis for their actions, accusing them of creating a conflict for propaganda, serving only their own selfish ends. Mr. Speaker, as we saw in the House last week, members are rightly keen to hear how this situation could be brought to an end. The answer must include the vital right to self-defence when we're attacked. But that is only one part of our wider response, which I want to say more about today. First, we are increasing our diplomatic engagement because we recognise the deep concerns about and the complexities of the current situation. I spoke to President Biden about these issues last night. The Foreign Secretary will be in the region in the coming days, and he met his Iranian counterpart last week. He made clear that they must cease supplying the Houthis with weapons and intelligence and use their influence to stop Houthi attacks. Second, we must end the illegal flow of arms to the Houthi militia. We have intercepted weapon shipments in the region before, including components of the very missiles used by the Houthis today. This brings home the importance of maritime security in the region, and that includes working closely with our allies and partners to disrupt and deter the supply of weapons and components. Third, we are going to use the most effective means at our disposal to cut off the Houthis' financial resources where they are used to fund these attacks. We are working closely with the United States on this and plan to announce new sanction measures in the coming days. Fourth, we need to keep helping the people of Yemen, who have suffered so terribly as a result of the country's civil war. We will continue to deliver humanitarian aid and support a negotiated peace in that conflict, not just because it's the right thing to do, but also because we need to show the people of Yemen that we have no quarrel with them, as the Yemeni government itself understands. So, Mr. Speaker, this is our strategy, and we will keep all other tools under close review as well. Mr. Speaker, I repeat that there is no link between our actions of self-defence in the Red Sea and the situation in Israel and Gaza. Those who make that link do the Houthis work for them. And I want to be clear that those here at home who glorify the Houthis' attacks are glorifying terrorism, plain and simple. They will be met with a zero-tolerance approach. Now, all of that said, Mr. Speaker, I would like to address the situation in Israel and Gaza directly because it remains at the forefront of members' minds. President Biden and I again discussed this yesterday, and he shares my deep concerns about the situation, about the terrible suffering and loss of civilian lives. So together we are working to establish a new aid route through the port of Ashdod. And Mr. Speaker, the UK wants to see an end to the fighting in Gaza as soon as possible. We are calling for an immediate humanitarian pause to get aid in and hostages out as a vital step towards building a sustainable, permanent ceasefire without a return to destruction, fighting, and loss of life. But to achieve that, Hamas must agree to the release of all hostages. They can no longer be in charge of Gaza. The threat from Hamas terror and rocket attacks must end, and an agreement must be in place for the Palestinian Authority to return to Gaza to provide governance, services, and security. That is the pathway to peace that should unite the whole House. And I believe we are also united in support of a two-state solution. Mr. Speaker, through all the complexity of the current situation, our principles hold firm. Resolute in the face of threats, compassionate in support of those in need, and determined in maintaining stability, security, and the rule of law. That is what our allies and partners have come to expect from the United Kingdom. That is what we stand for, and I commend this statement to the House.
I now call the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Prime Minister for advance copy of his statement. Labour said we will judge further action on the Houthis on a case-by-case basis. So let me be clear, we back this targeted action to reinforce maritime security in the Red Sea. The Houthi attacks must stop. They are designed to destabilise us, so we must stand united and strong. They bring danger to ordinary civilians working hard at sea, so we must protect them. And they aim to disrupt the flow of goods, food and medicines, so we must not let them go unaddressed. The professionalism and bravery of those serving on HMS Diamond and flying RAF Typhoons are both totally accepted and completely remarkable. Without them, Britain cannot be a force for good in the world. Mr. Speaker, these are, of course, the second set of strikes that the UK has participated in, and the stated aim of the first set was to deter and degrade Houthi capability. But we now know that their attacks have continued. So while we do not question the justification for action, it is right that the House hears more about their effectiveness. Labour, of course, recognises that strikes can be used to reduce threat without eliminating it, and we recognise that the military action taken is just one component of a wider diplomatic strategy. But nonetheless, I would ask the Prime Minister to set out his confidence that these strikes will be effective in reducing Houthi capabilities. And while, of course, we understand the clear legal basis for these actions, as the situation has evolved, can the Prime Minister now commit to restating and republishing the government's legal position? Mr. Speaker, alongside the UK and the US, other countries have provided non-operational support for these strikes and maritime protection in the Red Sea. Many more support the United Nations Security Council resolution that utterly condemns the Houthi attacks. So can I ask the Prime Minister what work is being done to hold together that coalition and to, if possible, enlarge that coalition? The action the UK takes must draw on the support of all those who care about international law. And given the special role the UK plays in Yemen, can he set out the concrete steps, in addition to those in his statement, that we are taking to help the people of Yemen, who have suffered terribly as a result of that country's civil war? Because, Mr. Speaker, the international community cannot allow itself to be divided. That is exactly what the Houthi backers in Tehran would love to see. And on that note, can he also update the House on whether his government has given further consideration to the prescription of the IRGC? We do need every tool at our disposal to disrupt IRGC activities, and we must show Iran that it cannot pursue its ends by destabilising the entire region. Because, like the Prime Minister, I totally reject the Houthi claims that attacking ships from around the world is somehow linked to the conflict in Gaza. These attacks do absolutely nothing for the Palestinian people. What is needed in Gaza is a humanitarian truce now, a sustainable ceasefire to stop the killing of innocent civilians, the space for the return of all the hostages, urgent humanitarian relief, and a decisive step towards a two-state solution. Because, Mr. Speaker, Palestinian statehood is the inalienable right of the Palestinian people. It is not in the gift of a neighbour. So does he agree with me that a secure Israel, alongside a viable Palestinian state, is the only path to a just and lasting peace? Because, Mr. Speaker, we must stop those who sow division. We must do what we can to disrupt and deter Houthis. And we must stay united and steadfast in defence of our values, our security and our right to self-defence. Labour will always act in the national interest, and we provide our full support for these necessary and proportionate strikes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister. Well, can I thank the Leader of the Opposition for his statement, but also his support, and I'm grateful to him for that. And he raises all the right questions about the action today, which I'm happy to answer. I think first he asked about the effectiveness of strikes in deterring and precisely degrading capability. I am pleased to tell him that further evidence after the initial statement I made last week has demonstrated to us that the strikes last week were effective in degrading capability, and all the intended targets were destroyed. And I'm also pleased to say that our initial evidence from last night's strikes is also that all intended targets were destroyed, which demonstrates to us, and in working with our allies who have the same view, that the strikes are working to degrade capability, even as he said there may be a difference between reducing and eliminating, but we are confident that what we are doing is working to degrade capability. The targets are specifically selected on the basis of intelligence, military sites which impact the security and safety of seafarers and shipping, and to that end I'm confident that, as I said, the strikes are being carried out in a way that is effective in achieving their aim. I thank him for acknowledging that the strikes sit within a wider strategy in the region to bring about an end to what we are seeing. The Foreign Secretary will be in the region this week, engaging extensively with our partners and allies on all the topics he raised, particularly ensuring that we can continue to make progress on a sustainable peace in Yemen, and no doubt talking to our Saudi partners about that, but also, crucially, broadening the coalition of support for the action that we have taken. As I pointed to in my statement, there have been multiple statements made by a wide coalition of countries from around the world in support of action, and he can rest assured that we are continuing to expand that coalition of support, because the security of navigation and of shipping impacts all countries wherever they might be, not just in the Red Sea. I think all of us have seen the consequences of the war in Ukraine on energy bills across the European continent and beyond. So I think people are very alive to the interconnectedness of the global economy and the importance of protecting freedom of navigation everywhere. With regard to the legal advice, my understanding was that we had, or were imminently about to publish, a summary of the legal advice. I can happily give him that confirmation, but also just confirm to him that the basis for action remains the same as it was last time, but an update to that effect has been published or will shortly be published by the Attorney General. And lastly, I'll just touch on his broader point. He's right to highlight the malign influence of Iran in the region. Obviously, we don't comment on ongoing decisions or processes around prescription of organisations, but he can rest assured that we're alive to the risk and working closely with our allies, in particular the United States and our European allies, to jointly work out the most effective way of countering that influence. As I said, the Foreign Secretary spoke to his counterpart last week, and we will continue to use all measures at our disposal to protect ourselves. We passed the National Security Act here in the UK and have already sanctioned the IRGC in its entirety. But more generally on the specific action that we have taken, I thank him again for his support. We have taken limited, proportionate, and I believe necessary action in self-defence. We will always reserve the right to do that, to protect innocent lives and freedom of navigation. Our desired outcome, of course, is for the Houthis to desist, to de-escalate the situation. What they are doing is unacceptable and illegal, and the onus should be on them to stop it. But we will use all levers at our disposal, including diplomacy and sanctions, to achieve that objective.
Chair of the Defence Select Committee, Jeremy Quinn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome what my right honourable friend says about diplomatic and humanitarian efforts?
Well, there you go. There was a pretty amicable dialogue between the Prime Minister there and the leader of the opposition. The Prime Minister giving a statement initially about the strikes against the Houthi rebels overnight.
Some interesting points. Sunak, the Prime Minister rather, saying that anyone at home who seeks to glorify the Houthi rebels, presumably referencing protesters, some who at the weekend or the week before said, Yemen, Yemen, make us proud, turn another ship around. He said they'd be met with zero tolerance. Which
that means? I don't know. But shall we speak to GBNews security editor Mark White, who's been listening carefully to what's been going on in the House of Commons. What do you take from that? There seems to be a consensus that this military action on the part of the US and the UK was the right thing to do.
Yes, I mean, in terms of what the Prime Minister was saying there, clearly the hope is in Washington and in London that the Houthis will now get the message and they will step back from what they're doing. There's no indication that that's the case. In fact, just a short while ago, we were reporting more drone activity reported in the Red Sea. And the Prime Minister said, look, if there is more in the way of strikes on shipping passing through the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden in that area, then the UK government would not hesitate to act again. He said, with regard to these strikes, he said it's impossible for the UK really to respond to every instance where the Houthis are striking at ships. However, when they have made that assessment about the military capabilities and how best to use that, then this kind of action, a strike that is aimed at degrading that military capability of the Houthi rebels, is something that the UK clearly would be willing to partake in again with the US in the days and weeks ahead. I guess, you know, to an extent, the ball is back in the court of the Houthi rebels here. What will they do? We've seen the drone activity today. If they continue with their strikes, then there's no doubt from what the Prime Minister was saying there that there will be a military response from the US and the UK. Does it take it into the longer term? Well, the hope of the Prime Minister and indeed leaders in Washington is not. You heard there that they have been carrying out intelligence assessments where they are suggesting that capability of the Houthi rebels to launch these missiles at shipping in that area is being degraded. There was an assessment out a few days back that suggested that military capability had been degraded by around 30% or so. What the current assessment is, we don't know. That will be worked on, obviously, as they look at the satellite images, drone images, intelligence from the ground to determine just how successful the operations that took place overnight were.
Mark, I have to say, I'm extremely proud of our brave armed forces, our men and our women who are steaming out to the Red Sea to try and deal with this situation, despite clearly having depleted workforce and also a lack of aircraft carriers and jets as well. However, that said, why is it always the UK and the US seeing to this kind of thing? Where is our European neighbours, NATO? Why is it us all the time?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, the UK says it has a right and responsibility to act to protect shipping that are vital to the UK's national interests as well. Of course, any shipping that is targeted in the Red Sea or the Gulf of Aden has a potential to cause effects further down the chain here in the UK. But on that other point there about why other nations are not joining in, I think it's a well-made point. Bahrain, Canada, a few others have offered some kind of support, I think more logistical in terms of the coalition, but the actual military strikes are being conducted primarily by the US with assistance from the UK. You have other nations out there taking part in the operation to try to protect shipping, but that's not an offensive role to go.
Mark, I'm going to have to cut in there as we're coming up to the end of the hour, but we're going to get more reaction to that statement from Rishi Sunak just after the break.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. It's a wet and windy day out there. Disruptive winds overnight as Storm Jocelyn moves in. Now, Storm Jocelyn, coming just 2 days after Storm Isha, is going to cause further impacts because of the ongoing repair and recovery work. But it is a notch down on what we saw with Storm Isha. I think overnight, the northern two-thirds of the UK seeing gusts of 50, 60 miles an hour. And for the north and west of Scotland, the risk of 80-mile-per-hour wind gusts. So not quite as strong as Isha, but the potential for some significant impacts nevertheless. We're going to see the rain turn to showers overnight. The heaviest downpours will be affecting Scotland and Northern Ireland. Further south, some clear spells. Nevertheless, a blustery start for all of us as we begin Wednesday. Some decent bright weather out there, and the winds do start to decrease through the morning and early part of the afternoon. We'll see further showers across Scotland, some thunderstorms here and there, but actually there'll be some sunshine in between. And for many, it's a fine start to the afternoon. But for Wales and the southwest, some rain turns up by the end of the afternoon here, and it's going to be a mild day for all of us. Now, Thursday starts off with the rain I mentioned there, just moving northeast across the country, a lot of cloud cover away from the northeast of Scotland and increasingly breezy once again. Friday we'll see a mix of sunny spells with some showers in the north. Saturday, more wind and rain.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubs and Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
to find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is 1 o'clock on Tuesday, the 23rd of January.
Houthi rebel strikes. The Prime Minister has updated Parliament on the joint UK-US strikes on Houthi rebels in Yemen. He defended the military action, saying he'll not hesitate to take further strikes in the Yemen. We'll break down what he said and get all the latest reaction.
We will indeed. And the Lords have their say. The unelected chamber has been accused of acting against the will of the people as peers attempt to torpedo Rishi Sunak's Rwanda plan. Is it time to abolish the House of Lords?
And this is a controversial one. The fat-busting balloon pill now available on the NHS. The first 2 British patients have received the newest weight loss treatment. But is it right for it to be free through our health service? So, a little bit earlier, I said that why do we always take these potions and concoctions to lose weight? Maybe just stop eating as much and maybe go down the gym. I've had a few emails from a few cross people who said, well, as you said, actually, it's not as simple as that for some people. They struggle with their weight. Maybe it's genetics. Maybe it's...
Stop your fat shaming.
It's
not everyone is born lean like you were.
Born lean.
Have you always been slim?
The thing is, I grew up playing...
Have you ever struggled with your weight?
No.
Well, exactly.
However,
so you can't speak on this topic. You're totally
let me finish.
unqualified to talk about this.
No. I grew up playing sport. I played a lot of tennis growing up, and if you grow up in that environment, your body adapts to how it stores fat when you're older. So I'm lucky on that front.
But do you know what I don't like? Because you've clearly got a superiority complex.
No, I haven't at all.
You know, you think you're better than people who have a few extra pounds.
No, I want to empower people to do things themselves, to educate themselves on food and nutrition and exercise, instead of just running to the chemist or the pharmacist and saying,
why shouldn't someone take a capsule that contains a gastric balloon that is then filled with water to make them feel fuller for longer? What's wrong with that?
That sounds enticing.
It does sound a little bit weird, doesn't it?
Sounds a lot of fun. You'd have a lot more fun going down the gym and making nice food and meeting people.
I know, but it is true that if you take two people and they have the same lifestyle, they may not end up the same weight.
Well, actually, there's a
So some people just pack on the pounds far quicker than others, and also other people, you know, it's a vice.
Yeah.
Food is their vice.
Yeah.
And it's hard to combat that.
All right, well, that was your starter. Your main's coming up later with our panel. We're going to discuss this a bit further and see what they think. Am I just being bigoted and fatphobic?
Yeah, gbviews@gbnews.com. Should we stop the fat shaming?
Yeah.
OK, well, let's get the headlines with Tatiana.
Emily, thank you and good afternoon. 2 minutes past 1, your top stories from the GB Newsroom. The Prime Minister says the UK will not hesitate to take further action in Yemen following a spate of attacks in the Red Sea. Rishi Sunak told MPs Britain is not seeking a confrontation as he urged the Houthis and those who enable them to stop what he called illegal and unacceptable attacks. He signalled new sanctions to be announced in the coming days. It comes after last night's joint strike with the US on Houthi targets in Yemen following attacks by the Iranian-backed militants on commercial ships in the Red Sea. The Prime Minister says Britain will deter any further attacks.
We are not seeking a confrontation. We urge the Houthis and those who enable them to stop these illegal and unacceptable attacks. But if necessary, the United Kingdom will not hesitate to respond again in self-defence. We cannot stand by and allow these attacks to go unchallenged. Inaction is also a choice.
The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, says his party backs the government in its action.
Labour said we will judge further action on the Houthis on a case-by-case basis. So let me be clear, we back this targeted action to reinforce maritime security in the Red Sea. The Houthi attacks must stop. They are designed to destabilise us, so we must stand united and strong. They bring danger to ordinary civilians working hard at sea, so we must protect them.
Another storm sweeping across Britain, bringing fresh disruption for commuters just a day after Storm Isha. The Met Office says Storm Jocelyn will bring strong winds with amber and yellow alerts issued for much of the country. Yellow warnings for rain and ice are also in place across northern and eastern parts of Scotland. TransPennine Express is among several train operators warning of disruption. It's urging passengers to avoid travelling between England and Scotland from 3 o'clock this afternoon. A mass screening of more than 300,000 police officers, staff and volunteers has led to 9 criminal investigations. The review, which was carried out in the wake of Sarah Everard's murder by a serving officer, uncovered 461 cases in need of assessment. Most of the officers were ranked Chief Inspector or below, but one chief officer was found to need management action. One case involved alleged sexual offences, while another was due to claims of drug offences. There were also 2 accusations of fraud. A man who killed 3 people in a spate of attacks in Nottingham has had his not guilty plea accepted on the grounds of diminished responsibility due to mental illness. 32-year-old Valdo Calacane, also known as Adam Mendez, instead pled guilty to manslaughter in November. He killed university students Barnaby Webber and Grace O'Malley Coomer and school caretaker Ian Coates in June last year. He also admitted to trying to murder 3 pedestrians who were hit by a van on the morning of the attacks. Rishi Sunak says the UK will work with Belgium to combat people smuggling gangs as he welcomed the country's Prime Minister to Downing Street. Alexander De Croo praised Britain as a good neighbour, with the two leaders pledging to tackle illegal migration with increased cooperation. The Belgian leader said he looked forward to working with the UK in what he described as a first-of-a-kind law enforcement partnership. Donald Trump says he expects his last remaining Republican opponent to drop out after today's New Hampshire primary. Polls point to a likely victory for the former president, but Nikki Haley's exit is not guaranteed. The affluent northeastern state has a large number of independent voters, and the former UN ambassador has gained support over recent months. Royal Mail has been charging customers £5 to get their post after senders unknowingly bought fake stamps from some post offices. An investigation by GBNews found books of stamps bought directly from post offices and some local supermarkets were found to be counterfeit. Those affected are now being forced to pay 4 times the cost of a standard first-class stamp. The post office says it receives stamps directly from Royal Mail, and a spokesperson told GBNews it has a robust process for verifying stamps. Anyone who thinks they've been incorrectly charged should contact them. And 2 million people could have their gas and electricity cut off this winter because they cannot afford to pay their bills. Citizens Advice says it's concerned over the affordability of essential services after Ofgem announced power companies will be allowed to resume forcibly installing prepayment meters in some households. Those are your top stories on GB News across the UK on TV, in your car on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying Play GB News. Now back to Ben and Emily.
Welcome back. Here with Ben and Emily on Good Afternoon Britain. It's 1:08. Now, in the last hour, the Prime Minister updated the House of Commons on the joint US-UK airstrikes against the Houthi rebels overnight in Yemen, as the militant group continues to attack commercial and military shipping in the Red Sea.
Yes, Rishi Sunak added that he will not hesitate to take further action if necessary.
For more on this, now let's speak to GB News political correspondent Olivia Utley, live in Westminster. Olivia, what did you make of Rishi Sunak's statement and Sir Keir Starmer's response? They were both quite measured and agreeable, weren't they?
Well, as Emily said earlier, it felt like a very amicable exchange in the House of Commons. Rishi Sunak said pretty much exactly what we were expecting him to say. This was necessary action in self-defence, and defending that really important shipping route in the Red Sea is vital to UK security. He said that he would be prepared to do the same thing again, and he said that the legal advice this time round was exactly the same as it was 10 days ago. We were all very interested to see what Keir Starmer had to say, because there was a bit of a kerfuffle this morning over whether Keir Starmer had found out before the strikes took place that they were going to happen. Last time he was warned in advance, although Rishi Sunak stopped short of recalling the House of Commons. This time, Labour Shadow Minister Karen Smith, speaking to GB News and other broadcasters this morning, said that the Leader of the Opposition hadn't heard about it. So there was a bit of a question mark over how Starmer would respond. Starmer's response was, as you say, pretty positive. He said that he does fully back Rishi Sunak on these strikes. But he said that he would like to see the workings from Rishi Sunak, if you like. He wants to see the Prime Minister lay out something on the effectiveness of these strikes. He said that he understands the justification of them and he completely accepts that, but he would like to see something on the effectiveness. And that is a pertinent question because, of course, last time these strikes took place, just 10 days ago, just a few days later, there was another Houthi attack on a ship in the Red Sea. So there are those who are questioning whether these strikes are having enough of an impact, and that's something that Keir Starmer brought to the fore in that speech today. It was interesting, though, to see that he is still fully backing the Prime Minister, because last time this happened, although Keir Starmer went fully in, rowing behind the PM, there were a number of his more left-wing backbenchers who say that it was wrong for Rishi Sunak not to recall Parliament before the strikes went ahead, putting themselves at odds with their leader. It seems that Keir Starmer doesn't mind too much about that. If he is going to annoy his backbench rebels, he is prepared to accept the consequences of that.
Well, Olivia, he needs to be seen to distance himself very much from the foreign policy of his predecessor, doesn't he, Jeremy Corbyn? I think it was Zara Sultana, one of the left-wing Labour MPs, who was tweeting furiously, and also in the House, against this action. Was she? Was it Zara?
Loads of them.
Loads of them.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, Olivia, go on.
Yeah, loads of them, but Zara Sultana among them, yeah. Zara Sultana among them, exactly. And I think that's completely right, Emily. He really does always need to be seen to be distancing himself from Jeremy Corbyn. And obviously, over the last few years, he's gone a long way to doing that. He's flushed out quite a lot of the Corbynites in the shadow cabinet. Jeremy Corbyn himself and Diane Abbott, his number two, really, are no longer even Labour MPs. But within the Labour Party membership, there is still a strong left-wing contingent, and Keir Starmer has to show, or he believes anyway, that he has to show voters that left-wing contingent does not hold him, doesn't have him sort of wrapped around their little finger. He wants to show that he is his own man and he is willing to back this sort of foreign policy decision.
Yeah, Olivia, while we've got you, may I ask you about the parliamentary defeat the government had last night in the House of Lords, the Rwanda bill?
Yeah, absolutely. So it was an interesting night for the government. It was a bit of a mixed bag. There was the defeat of the Rwanda bill in the House of Lords, which does bode very badly for the Prime Minister. The motion essentially said that the Lords would not ratify the treaty, and that is thought to be the first time in history that the Lords have voted not to ratify this government treaty. We did see it coming. Lord Goldsmith, who's a former Labour Attorney General, said last week that he was going to set out some measures that the government, he wanted to sort of test the government. He set out 10 tests that he wanted the government to sign up to before the Lords agreed to ratify that treaty. Just to get into the nitty-gritty of it quickly, that treaty declares Rwanda a safe country to send illegal migrants to. The Lords say that it doesn't actually prove that Rwanda is a safe country, and it wants the government to sign up to a promise to, for example, bolster up the Rwandan immigration system. The government can overturn any amendments that are made in the Lords, and it can strong-arm this legislation through Parliament. But A, it won't be a very good look for the government if it has to resort to that sort of measure. It will make the government look pretty weak. And B, perhaps more importantly, it's going to take an awfully long time. The House of Lords have set out a timetable for this, saying that if by the 12th of March they're happy with the situation, then they might ratify it then, but only then. And Rishi Sunak, of course, has said that he would like to see planes taking off to Rwanda by the spring. This timeline is looking tighter and tighter, which the Prime Minister knows only too well.
Delaying tactics, we know those well.
Yeah, top stuff, Olivia Ali in Westminster. Thank you so much. Let's go now to sticking with the Houthi strikes. Defence analyst and former British Army officer, Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Crawford. Good afternoon, sir. Let's break it down in simplistic terms, shall we? What is the risk of this escalating into a much larger war and potentially maybe even World War III?
Good afternoon. Well, I think the potential for this to lead to World War III is pretty low at the moment, to be honest. What's happened, as you've rightly reported, is that the Houthis are adamant or determined, if you like, continue their attempted strikes on international shipping in the Red Sea, and the US and the UK plus others are pretty determined to make them stop, and that's where we are at the moment. It's not exactly an impasse, because the first time the Houthis, relatively speaking, got a bit of a slap in the wrist. This time they probably got a slap round the shoulders or around the neck, and if they continue with their intransigence, who knows what's going to happen next. I think another aspect that we must be aware of is that There is evidence that we are now deploying special forces to intercept the transfer of arms from Iran to the rebels. And that's probably ongoing. We'll learn more about that as it develops.
Interesting. Now, the aim is to deter and degrade the Houthi rebels. Are these strikes enough to achieve that?
Well, clearly not yet. But I would think that the strikes will be upgraded, if you like. We will up the ante, and they'll become more and more powerful until such times as we hope the Houthis will desist and realise that they're on a hiding to nothing.
And do we have enough? Sorry, Stuart. Do we have enough capability for all that?
Well, the Americans do, and we have as well. We're very lucky in having what I call our permanent aircraft carrier in Cyprus, which I know is controversial, but that saves us having to send one of our 2 new aircraft carriers there at the moment. And I think we've got the weaponry and the troops or the military forces in place at the moment for what is called for. Plus, of course, we have the naval assets in the Red Sea and what they're doing to down some of the missile attacks against Israel and against shipping.
Stuart, Penny Mordaunt yesterday was saying that we needed to increase our defence spending. I think over the past decade at least, we've been rapidly falling down the ranks in terms of spending compared to GDP. Would you back calls for Grant Shapps to increase spending at the next review?
Oh, very much so. I think it's absolutely essential if we're going to be able to continue our role as a global power, if that's what we want to do, and also as the USA's most dependable and regular ally. The NATO sort of benchmark for defence spending is 2% of GDP. We're slightly over that at the moment over the past few years, 2.1, 2.2 thereabouts. I think we really need to go to 3% of GDP to begin to restore the armed forces that we were able to field 20 years ago. And it's interesting that Poland, for example, is spending 4.5% of its GDP on defence matters because it's faced with a revanchist Russia, if you like. So absolutely. And Penny Mordaunt, who has a naval background, will know what's required.
Now, there is a fear, just finally, Stuart, there is a fear that sometimes we may bite off more than we can chew when it comes to interventions in this region. Is there a risk?
There is. I mean, absolutely there is. I mean, I think that I've said before, I think to you, Emily, actually, that, the Houthis and the Hezbollah and Hamas and the axis of resistance are all the symptoms of what's going on and what's going wrong in the Middle East. But, of course, the cause is Iran. And at some point, Iran has to be confronted. But that is a major undertaking which most people would see as an absolute last resort. And we're certainly not in a position to do that at the moment.
Well, thank you very much indeed for your time. Former British Army officer, Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Crawford, always good to speak to you.
And Stuart alluded to it there. I mean, thank goodness we have the US by our side. I know that's not going to be a popular statement amongst some viewers, but they are the biggest, the strongest superpower in the world, and we are their #1 ally. Their literal wingman. So
yes, and that segues us on to our next topic. We're going to be speaking to Anthony Scaramucci.
Yes, Donald Trump's former White House Director of Communications in 2017. He only lasted 10 days and he was dramatically sacked for what supporters say was running his mouth. He had some unkind words to say about Steve Bannon, who was a Trump ally at the time. But we're going to speak to him about...
We should ask him about that. Does he just have a grudge about Donald Trump?
Bitter?
He wants to back Biden. Over Donald Trump for the White House, which is quite something.
Yeah, and Scaramucci at the time, he had a long list of sort of plauditudes for Donald Trump, saying he loved him and he was loyal and he'd never leave his side. So he's going to be here live with us just after 2 o'clock, and I'm going to put all those quotes to him and ask him, the mooch, where's your loyalty? What happened?
Yeah, what happened? Well, you're watching Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Don't go anywhere.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubs and Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 1:23. You're with Ben and Emily on Good Afternoon Britain. Now, Rishi Sunak's Rwanda plan suffered its first defeat in the House of Lords yesterday when peers voted by 214 to 171 not to ratify the agreement.
Yes, so the unelected chamber has been accused of acting against the will of the people, with some accusing peers of purposefully torpedoing the Prime Minister's Rwanda plan. So this afternoon, we're going to have the debate. We're asking, is it time to abolish the House of Lords?
To debate this now, we're joined by 2 perfect people, Conservative peer Lord Sean Bailey and the leader of UKIP, Neil Hamilton. Sean, let's start with you first. Neil wants you out of job. What do you say to that?
I think, Neil, people misunderstand what the job of the Lords is. If you look at the history of this country, the Lords has helped make this country take small steps in the correct direction rather than big yaws one way or the other. And it's interesting, people always want to do something about the Lords when it doesn't give them the result they want. The Lords is part of the political process. Parliament has regularly not given me the result I want. I always want a Conservative government. I don't always get one. So I think actually people need to understand what went on. And yesterday in the Lords, although the government lost, lost, what people would have seen is a very detailed, long debate that really looked at the issues and didn't just fly off the handle. People looked at the debate. I wish the vote had gone a different way, but it was a very high-quality debate.
Is it not the case, though, Sean, and I hear you, but is it not the case that some of the peers in the House of Lords are attempting to delay the Rwanda plan for as long as possible until there's a general election?
Undoubtedly, that's their plan, but you could say the same of...
That's not part of the democratic process, though, is it, Sean? Really?
Well, it is, because undoubtedly you could say the same about many Labour MPs. The point being, wherever you sit on this, the Lords is there to refine, the Lords is there to scrutinise, and that's what we have done as a body for time immemorial. And a lot of British law is copied around the world. An important part of that process is the Lords scrutinising and looking at it. And I wonder if people would be saying, such as Richard, let's get rid of the Lords, if it's giving them the result they want. It's not about giving people the result they want. It's about making sure that we refine our laws and look at our laws properly so they actually work.
Neil Hamilton, this is a case of just more centralised power handed to unelected people, isn't it? But that's partly why we voted to leave the EU, because none of them are elected. We wanted to control our own laws, our own destiny. Yet these 700-plus people, including Sean, by the way, in the House of Lords, nobody voted for them. And they're now going up against a Prime Minister that the electorate didn't vote for and a Chancellor. So isn't it now the time to start seriously thinking about abolishing the House of Lords?
Well, the House of Lords is a constitutional absurdity in the 21st century. Whatever legitimacy it might have had in the 19th century is completely alien to the modern world. Yes, British law may well be copied around the world, but no other country in the world has copied the House of Lords as part of its legislative structures. Yeah, there may be high-quality debate in the House of Lords, but that isn't really what matters. What matters is democratic legitimacy. We know that an overwhelming majority of the British people want to see a much stricter control of migration, and 89% of the people think that the House of Lords should be abolished. Yes, there's a debate to be had about what's going to replace it. There are plenty of alternatives. We could have a second chamber which was more reflective of the different regions of the United Kingdom. We could have a House which is elected at different time from the House of Commons, and there are lots of ways in which we could enhance democracy in this country rather than detract from it, which we've got at the minute. Because look at the people who are in the House of Lords. It's a House of cronies, party hacks, party donors, bishops, and who is more irrelevant in modern Britain than bishops in the Church of England?
Neil, you're a small C conservative, are you not? Yeah. And you seem very radical in your approach to our constitutional frameworks, our House of Lords. Has it not overall served us quite well? Did you change your view since the Brexit debate?
Well, of course, the House of Lords would have frustrated Brexit. It's full of basic people of a Lib Dem mindset. And it's the Brexit debate all over again, isn't it? Alex Carlile, a former Liberal MP whom I served with in the House of Commons for 14 years, said that the purpose of the House of Lords is to protect democracy from itself. Now, that's the overweening arrogance of the political class that regards the electorate as the dirty, unwashed and ignorant rednecks
I don't agree with that, Neil.
Who need to be kept under control.
That's not
and the
right.
people who know best how they should be governed and how people should live their lives are those in the House of Lords. Now,
Neil, I'm sorry, Neil.
Let's get Sean's response to that.
I'm sorry, Neil.
Neil, deadbeats there as well. I know the House of Commons is full of them, but at least they're our duds and deadbeats. We can kick them out in a democratic vote if we want to. You can't do that to members of the House of Lords. Isn't it an absurdity that you're appointed for life?
Goodness me, Neil. You're on fire today. Let Sean come back on that.
Look, what Neil has done is that typical thing of putting words in people's mouths. If one person has said that and believes that, that's their view. That certainly isn't my experience of peers. They're very thoughtful about what they do, and of course there's a high level of expertise in there as well. And people are very mindful of the fact that they have to represent the country. That's why, for instance, constitutionally, if push comes to shove, the House of Commons can overrule the House of Lords. It's why the bishops tend not to vote against the government. They'll vote in the first round to register their opinion, the registered opinion of their congregation, which actually is a very large group of individuals, you know, bigger than most constituencies, as it were, so maybe bigger than one MP. The point being, the idea that it's a group of people who have no idea what they're doing and they're just playing party politics is actually so far from the truth, it's unbelievable. Again, I want to go back to the fact that the House of Lords sees itself as a place that is to scrutinise and refine laws and test laws, and that's what's going on. I sat in that debate yesterday, and it was a very high-quality debate, and I voted for the government, but even I sat there and thought, well, they do have some points, the government has to answer those points. And in the House of Lords, we have no limit, no time limit on debates, which is good, because it means we get all the way through the detail, and it's always delivered for the best of the country.
Sean, can we meet you halfway then? Can we say, you know, the 784 peers currently sitting in the House of Lords, which, by the way, they don't all fit in at once, do they? What happens when they're all in for the day?
There's two things I'd say about that. Obviously, I'm very new, and my opinion on that would be, look, you have the House of Lords is effectively part-time in a different way to an MP, and you have people who are expert in a very few areas, very expert in a few areas. So you tend to congregate around the bits of legislation where your expertise really works. That's the first thing.
Yeah.
The other thing as well, those 700 peers, they don't get paid unless they turn up. So you've got lots of people who never get turned up, and they don't cost the country anything. But you have peers who've turned up very regularly.
How many don't turn up when you're going to get 300 odd quid just for tapping your pass on the reader? Is there people that just can't be bothered?
That's such a childish and disingenuous way. People spend hours and hours and hours going through the paperwork, making sure they know what they're talking about and know what they're doing for the country. Many of the ministers in the House of Lords don't get paid, but they do a full ministerial job. So you reducing it just to tap it in for 300 quid, that's not fair. It isn't right. That isn't what goes on.
There
people
you go.
do the work.
That's your view. Neil, Sean says very clearly that the peers in the House of Lords take their duty very, very seriously to scrutinise legislation to make sure it is the best it can be and workable for the British public.
Yes, of course, there are a lot of good men and women in the House of Lords. Many of them are my friends, old friends, that I served in the House of Commons with. But the point is, at the end of the day, who is actually going to decide what the government of this country does? Is it unelected peers in the House of Lords, or is it a government elected by the people that is fulfilling a mandate which overwhelmingly opinion polls tell us is what the people want to see happen with controls on migration? And I'm no great advocate for the Rwanda bill, by the way. I think it's a distraction from the real issue of uncontrolled mass immigration. But I still come back to this point. By the way, I have no real complaint about the vote yesterday, which is merely to introduce a 21 sitting day delay in the treaty being ratified. So that's no big deal. But if the bill were ultimately to be thrown out by the House of Lords, that would be a different matter altogether, and that would be perfectly possible.
Yeah.
Fewer than half the people entitled. Fewer than half the members of the House of Lords voted yesterday. So you know, that's another point at issue here.
Okay.
In the House of Commons...
Neil Hamilton, we'll have to stop you there, unfortunately, and wrap this up. Thank you for your time. A fascinating debate. Lord Sean Bailey, Conservative peer, and, of course, the leader of UKIP, Neil Hamilton. Coming up, we are going to get stuck into, in more ways than one, this swallow a stone balloon to help you lose weight. This has caused a lot of controversy on the emails for the comments I've said. Some of you support me, some of you think I'm being a little bit nasty. I promise I'm not.
A fat shamer,
yeah,
maybe.
I'm not.
We'll be discussing that. Would you swallow one of these? Let us know with our panel after your headlines with Tatiana.
Emily, thank you and good afternoon. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. The Prime Minister says the UK will not hesitate to take further action in Yemen following a spate of attacks in the Red Sea. Rishi Sunak described attacks on commercial ships by the Iranian-backed militants as illegal and unacceptable. It comes after last night's joint strike with the US, which took place after a meeting with President Joe Biden. Mr Sunak says new sanctions will be announced in the coming days and further attacks will be deterred. New research suggests a simple blood test could be just as effective at detecting Alzheimer's disease as current practices, which are often painful and invasive. Experts say measuring levels of a particular protein in blood samples could be an even better way to detect the condition than other tests currently in development. Doctors say the findings have the potential to revolutionise the experience of people who are suspected to be suffering from the disease. A mass screening of more than 300,000 police officers, staff and volunteers has led to 9 criminal investigations. The review was carried out in the wake of Sarah Everard's murder by a serving officer. It uncovered 461 cases which were considered serious enough to warrant assessment by a senior officer. Another storm sweeping across Britain, bringing fresh disruption for commuters just a day after Storm Isha. The Met Office says Storm Jocelyn's bringing strong winds with amber and yellow alerts issued for much of the country. Yellow warnings for rain and ice are also in place across northern and eastern parts of Scotland. And Donald Trump says he expects his last remaining Republican opponent to drop out after today's New Hampshire primary. Polls point to a likely victory for the former president, but Nikki Haley's exit is not guaranteed. The affluent northeastern state has a large number of independent voters, and the former UN ambassador has gained support over recent months. You can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
For a valuable legacy your family can own, gold coins will always shine bright. Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2715 and 1.1698 euros. The price of gold is £1,594 and 7 pence per ounce, and the FTSE 100 at 7,489 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
to find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubs and Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's coming up to 1:40 in the afternoon, and we just had a debate about the House of Lords, whether it should be abolished, whether it's, you know,
the
archaic.
bloated House of Lords.
Archaic in 2024.
Why do you need nearly 800 peers to scrutinise legislation?
Yes, well, someone has written in to say, could you please ask why it needs 800 Lords to scrutinise bills? Wouldn't 100 be sufficient, or preferably 0? That was from Andy. He's not best pleased with the House of Lords. Peter says, I'm strongly for the House. I think the House of Lords should only have hereditary peers in it, not these ideological lot we have at present. You know what? I am quite sympathetic to that view because, and I may be wrong, perhaps the hereditary peers have a genuine sense of duty and they will scrutinise the bill in a more independent way rather than the politicos we have in there.
I don't know. I'm not sure that the offspring of, you know, of
Lord and
peers,
Lady.
I don't know, no. No, they probably just don't care. John had a good email. Good afternoon to you, John. He said, I wish I could walk up the stairs and put my clock card in and get 300 quid a day and a subsidised canteen and a wine bar. Yeah, me too.
Well, it's never too late to become a Lord. As someone's written in here, says it's the most expensive care home in the land. So never too late, never too late. You could have that £300 card.
They were calling me nasty for fat shaming.
Well, it wasn't my opinion. It was, you know, someone wrote in saying that. And Anthony says, I believe that the House of Lords should be proportional representatively elected, but the House of Commons should remain a first-past-the-post system. So there you go. There's some constructive reform ideas, because I doubt the whole thing's going to be abolished.
Keep those emails coming in. On fat shaming as well, that new device where you swallow and it basically expands in your stomach. It's like a gastric band, is it? So it stops you eating. I say just go to the gym. We've had lots of nasty emails saying that I'm bigoted and fat-shaming.
Sensible emails, because you were a bit fat-shaming.
No, someone said you were rude to me as well.
Someone did say that, but that was one out of hundreds.
I'll just
who are
defend you
on my
now.
side.
That's not true. You're very lovely.
Anyway, let's move
on. The man responsible for stabbing 3 people in Nottingham last June has had a plea of manslaughter accepted on the basis of diminished responsibility.
Yes, Barnaby Webber and Grace O'Malley Kumar, who were both 19 years old, alongside school caretaker Ian Coates, died after being attacked by Valdo Calacane.
The plea was accepted on the basis of diminished responsibility due to Mr Calcane's, quote, serious mental illness. We can get the latest with our reporter, Will Hollis, outside Nottingham Crown Court. Will, what's the latest? What's happened?
Well, those attacks that rocked the nation back on the June the 13th last year have been described as uncompromisingly brutal. But today here at Nottingham Crown Court, the prosecution accepted those pleas under the grounds of diminished responsibility. 3 for manslaughter for the killings of Barnaby Webber, Grace O'Malley Kumar and caretaker Ian Coates, as well as 3 for attempted murder for 3 pedestrians that were ran down in the city centre as part of the same spate of attacks. We say diminished responsibility because Valdo Calacane, who also goes by the name of Adam Mendez, is diagnosed as having paranoid schizophrenia. And in the hours before those attacks, he made phone calls to his brother in which he said that he was having 24/7 voices in his head. Now, the Crown say that that night he went out into the streets of Nottingham with the intent to kill with a rucksack full of weapons. And it was a double-edged fighting knife that he used to repeatedly stab his victims. We've been hearing in court today some of those exceptionally distressing details of the attacks, but we've also heard of bravery, particularly on the part of young Grace O'Malley Kumar, who tried to defend her friend who had just been attacked by Calacane. Now, there was the family members of all of the victims here in court today, and understandably, some of those distressing details were incredibly difficult to hear. We heard sobs and at some points crying from members of the family, and at one point they had to stop the proceedings so that they could leave. This is still a hearing that is ongoing. It has now become a sentencing hearing, and later this week we can expect to hear exactly what will become of Valdo Calacane.
Thanks very much, Will Hollis at Nottingham Crown Court. Let's get stuck into some of the biggest stories of the day now, shall we? We're joined by former editor of the Sunday Express and senior advisor to Pagefield, Martin Townsend, and the former Labour advisor, Matthew Laza. Matthew, we heard from Rishi Sunak in the Commons earlier. He gave that statement that Labour were clambering for to the Commons about the Houthi strikes in Yemen last night. First of all, can we just clear up whether Labour were briefed or not? They say they weren't. The Tories say they were. Who was telling the truth?
Well, I think you know whether you were briefed or not. So, I mean, I would say that, wouldn't I? But I think it's clear. It seems that they didn't brief the Labour side in the usual way, which I think is unfortunate. But, you know, we are where we are.
But should they? I said earlier, should they give a running commentary to
Well,
the
it's a private running commentary. You know, it's not in public. It's not, you know... but I think it is important the opposition involved. And I think that when Labour was in government, it did the same. So I think it's a courtesy and part of the democratic process, particularly because, understandably, you can't keep running commentary in public going before action like this.
Although, is it a bit odd, perhaps I'm being naive here, almost, why would Karen Smith, who was doing the media rounds this morning, why would she raise this and not Keir Starmer raise this in the House?
Yeah, I think it was clear last night that Keir's office made it clear that they weren't briefed last night. I think Keir probably didn't want to raise it in the House because he doesn't want to make it all about him. He doesn't want to make it about what he was saying. He wants to concentrate on...
It would be a bit naff.
It would be. He wants to concentrate on thanking our forces for their action and looking at the wider issue. But I think the government needs to be careful that it keeps the opposition in the loop, which is kind of how it should work, whoever's in power.
Martin?
Yeah, I've got the same view, unfortunately. I'd love to be able to argue.
Well, we argue about last night.
You know how much I love to be able to argue with Matthew, but yeah, I think... and over the years, we've seen this happen time and again. You know, if there's something that's of huge national significance like that, you know, involving defence, involving our sort of forces, then Labour should always be, the opposition party, whoever it happens to be, should always be briefed privately and brought up to date. That's the way it should be.
It was quite nice to see how both measured and agreeable they were. It was made a nice change. But talking about the Red Sea, we've steamed in there on the coattails of the United States with, it's becoming apparent, a very depleted armed forces. We've got no sailors, we've got no jets for our 2 aircraft carriers which are languishing in Portsmouth. Is there a case now for increased defence spending, and should we really be steaming into conflicts like the Red Sea when we are actually so depleted?
Well, I think that the depletion of our forces is a very serious issue. I think we're OK to do what we're doing in the Red Sea, partly because of the depletion of our forces. We've only done the 2 sets of strikes. The Americans have done a whole series. I think it's sort of 8 without us. So that shows actually that, you know, we can add a little, but we can't add as much as perhaps we should do. And look, we're reaching a crunch point across Europe. Governments across Europe of all political stripes are having to realise that it's time, you know, that sadly it is a very unstable world out there, and that maybe what we dreamed of at the end of the Cold War, where defence could be put at the back of the queue, as it were, for when the cheques are being handed out, is not going to happen. So you've seen conscription reintroduced in Sweden under the Social Democrats when they were in power, and it's now just coming into force.
It's quite amazing, really. Martin, do you understand concerns, though, that perhaps we are biting off more than we can chew with all this? Or is it a necessary retaliatory attack and there isn't any other option?
Well, I think we should... Yeah, I do. I do think it's a necessary retaliatory attack. I don't think... and I don't think we steamed in, by the way. I think it was done... It's always done with a huge amount of thought.
Measured.
It's measured. On the subject of more money for our armed forces, I would make the point that whenever I see stories saying we've bought the wrong aircraft carrier, it doesn't do this, or we've got guns that don't work, I would say, yeah, we could increase the defence spending, but let's, for heaven's sake, make sure that in future we're buying the right equipment, the right things that are required for the strategy we're pursuing, and also make sure that they're not going to be unfit for purpose. Because time and again over the years, we've seen billions of pounds being wasted on projects that are just not quite right, or take forever to. By the time they're actually completed, they go out of time.
Is it difficult to know, though, what exact capabilities we're going to need? Because these things are always bought and purchased.
It's not so much that, it's just incompetence.
It's incompetence, and it's not difficult to buy guns that won't jam. To buy aircraft carriers that are actually going to have to, you know, and make sure you've actually got jets to put on them. There are so many of these. The MOD, I think, has been, you know, systematically guilty of of these kind of
Getting the basics wrong.
And getting the basics wrong.
And that's been very hard for either party to turn around. Labour tried to turn around defence procurement to make it more efficient. The Tories have done the same. Never mind the blob in the rest of the civil service. It's a big old institution to turn around.
The Queen Elizabeth aircraft carrier in Portsmouth holds up to 35 F-35s, apparently. We've only got 8 there, and the rest, at least a dozen, are on a training exercise. They're booked. They're pre-booked. Like a meeting room at work, it's pre-booked. You can't use them, which is absurd when there's a real-life conflict going.
Yeah, Labour commissioned the aircraft carriers when it was in government. They were one of the last things that Gordon Brown signed off. But yeah, I mean, look, we can't have a defence if we don't have enough people in it. We've got the smallest armed forces in terms of personnel since the Napoleonic Wars.
Yeah, but that claim is always made.
Well,
honestly, look, I used to edit a newspaper every single year. The military would complain
they do moan
that they hadn't got enough people, right? And maybe it's true and maybe it isn't, but it's such a kind of. Every time, something like this happens, we haven't got enough people.
I think the Navy's got a particular issue, because I think what happened
the Navy does have an issue.
Remember when everything was about airstrikes in the noughties and the 2010s, when everything was about airstrikes, and we kind of forgot about the Navy a bit, and now obviously everything's about keeping the shipping lanes open, so we've remembered the Navy.
Why are we not capable of thinking about more than one thing at a time? It does seem like that. Should we move on to something perhaps lighter or heavier in some respects?
I think it's a bit heavier, judging by the inbox.
Yes, so the first 2 NHS patients to receive a new type of weight loss pill have been treated in Somerset. And this is quite curious. The patients were given a capsule that contains a gastric balloon that is then filled with water, and essentially this makes people feel fuller for longer so that they eat less.
Stop eating, yeah. Look, so my problem with this isn't... I'm going to address all these emails that have been flooding in. I haven't got a problem with people who are ill, you're taking steroids, you're taking medication, or you've got a particular glandry problem that causes you to gain weight. I have no issue with you. My only point was that it's great to educate yourself about nutrition and going to the gym, because actually that's a very fun and wholesome process. I don't think they are clued up. Matthew, do you think people generally for example, people chew and scoff down white pasta and have a pasta salad and think that's a nutritious meal.
Just covered in mayonnaise.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Exactly. Do you know what I mean? Do you get my point?
No, I think you're right. I mean, I think that to a certain extent, in that people are not always as informed, and people need to think about the choices they're making. I'm very pro the NHS doing this, partly because it's going to save the NHS money in the long run. And I think it's actually good on the NHS in Somerset, because it's been knocking around for a few years privately, this treatment, but it's the first time it's been available on the NHS. It's even nice the people who say yes or no within the NHS to whether you can have a treatment can be allowed, said yes a few years ago, but actually on the ground it hasn't been offered yet, because it's which budget does it come out of? Because the NHS is good if you need the serious operation 5 years down the line, but to get you, because this is it operates a little bit less than a gastric band, doesn't it? Obviously it's much less. You just swallow it. It takes about 20.
Yeah, it's less.
It takes an hour or something.
You don't have surgery.
That's it. That's the word I was looking for. It's less invasive. So therefore, I think you do it earlier in the kind of weight gaining procedure. So that's one of the places the NHS sometimes stumbles, isn't it? When it should intervene.
I mean, maybe we shouldn't get too excited. Only 2 patients have received this, and of course we'll have to monitor it to see if it works and has the intended results, because sometimes with these things they last a couple of years and then people go back to their ordinary eating patterns, as people do, and they put the weight back on.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely what's going to happen. I'm absolutely with this, that, if you want to lose weight, you get your diet on point and you also do exercise. It's no use taking a weight loss pill and then sitting on the sofa and watching telly for 4 hours, 5 hours. That's not how it works. And I genuinely think that in order to from a long-term perspective for the NHS to actually solve this obesity problem. There are people that have medical weight problems, and I understand that they would need these pills in order to maybe reduce their weight, and I absolutely sympathise, and I'm not against them being handed out. What I am against is that somehow they're a magical miracle cure for gaining weight, when actually the real answer is actually people themselves taking responsibility, exercising. How much does it take to do half an hour's walk a day?
There's a lot of people who do genuinely really struggle with going out and exercising, and those people will struggle with food. And so I do worry that sometimes we get a bit judgy.
Absolutely. I think that's a danger. I think sometimes we go the other way and say that, you know, everything's OK. And obviously, without shaming anybody, there are health consequences if you're seriously overweight.
We're going to have to hold you there. Martin Townsend and Matthew Larser, thank you very much. You'll be back with us in the next hour. Coming up in just a few minutes at the start of the 2 o'clock, we've got Anthony Scaramucci, Donald Trump's former comms chief. It's going to be a big interview. Don't miss it.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. It's a wet and windy day out there. Disruptive winds overnight as Storm Jocelyn moves in. Now, Storm Jocelyn, coming just 2 days after Storm Isha, is going to cause further impacts because of the ongoing repair and recovery work. But it is a notch down on what we saw with Storm Isha. I think overnight, the northern two-thirds of the UK seeing gusts of 50, 60 miles an hour. And for the north and west of Scotland, the risk of 80-mile-per-hour wind gusts. So not quite as strong as Isha, but the potential for some significant impacts nevertheless. We're going to see the rain turn to showers overnight. The heaviest downpours will be affecting Scotland and Northern Ireland. Further south, some clear spells. Nevertheless, a blustery start for all of us as we begin Wednesday. Some decent bright weather out there, and the winds do start to decrease through the morning and early part of the afternoon. We'll see further showers across Scotland, some thunderstorms here and there, but actually there'll be some sunshine in between. And for many, it's a fine start to the afternoon. But for Wales and the southwest, some rain turns up by the end of the afternoon here, and it's going to be a mild day for all of us. Now, Thursday starts off with the rain I mentioned there, just moving northeast across the country, a lot of cloud cover away from the northeast of Scotland, and increasingly breezy once again. Friday, we'll see a mix of sunny spells with some showers in the north. Saturday, more wind and rain.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 2 o'clock on Tuesday, 23rd of January.
The mooch speaks out. Donald Trump's former White House communications chief sensationally declares he's backing Joe Biden over his old boss to win the US presidential election. Anthony Scaramucci joins us live for exclusive insight into a possible second Trump term and what it would mean for Britain.
Yeah, can't wait for that one. Houthi rebel strikes last night. The Prime Minister has updated Parliament on the joint UK-US strikes on Houthi rebels in Yemen. He defended the military action, saying he will not hesitate to take further airstrikes in the Yemen. We'll break down what he said and get all the latest reaction.
We will indeed, and the Lords have their say. The unelected chamber has been accused of acting against the will of the people as peers attempt to torpedo Rishi Sunak's Rwanda plan, or at least delay it. Is it time to abolish the House of Lords? Well, lots on today.
Yes, it's been an action-packed day. Lots of news stories going around and great guests for you as well. We had Robert Buckland earlier in the show, but the one I'm looking forward to most, no offence, Robert Buckland, is Anthony Scaramucci.
Go on, tell me why.
Coming up. Well, he was Donald Trump's former communications chief in 2017 when he was president. He was there for 10 days. We'll ask him why he got sacked, but the story is that he was running his mouth in the press and used some profane language about some of Donald's friends.
But it will be very interesting to find out why he thinks that Trump is such a liability that he would prefer to see Joe Biden have a second term.
So in 2017, Mr. Scaramucci said that he was very loyal to Donald Trump, and he said, I love him. I love the mission that the president has been on since the early days of the campaign. I'm going to present those quotes to Scaramucci and ask what's changed and why is he now backing Joe Biden for the presidency this year if Donald Trump is the Republican nominee? And also, most importantly, this is a British show, of course, what does it mean for Britain?
Yeah, I want to know. It seems there's a split. Some people believe that it would be a safer world with Donald Trump.
Boris Johnson, of course, in the Daily Mail over the weekend said that we need Trump for world peace.
And others think it would be an absolute disaster, not least for Ukraine. So there you go. Let's get your headlines with Tatiana.
Emily, thank you. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister says the UK will not hesitate to take further action in Yemen following a spate of attacks in the Red Sea. Rishi Sunak described attacks on commercial ships by the Iranian-backed militants as illegal and unacceptable. It comes after last night's joint strike with the US, which took place after a meeting with the President Joe Biden. Mr Sunak says new sanctions would be announced in the coming days and any further attacks will be deterred.
We are not seeking a confrontation. We urge the Houthis and those who enable them to stop these illegal and unacceptable attacks. But if necessary, the United Kingdom will not hesitate to respond again in self-defence. We cannot stand by and allow these attacks to go unchallenged. Inaction is also a choice.
The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, says his party backs the government in its action.
Labour said we will judge further action on the Houthis on a case-by-case basis. So let me be clear, we back this targeted action to reinforce maritime security in the Red Sea. The Houthi attacks must stop. They are designed to destabilise us, so we must stand united and strong. They bring danger to ordinary civilians working hard at sea. So we must protect them.
A mass screening of more than 300,000 police officers, staff and volunteers has led to 9 criminal investigations. The review, carried out in the wake of Sarah Everard's murder by a serving officer, uncovered 461 cases in need of assessment. Most of the officers were ranked Chief Inspector or below, but one chief officer was found to need management action. In one case, it involved alleged sexual offences, while another was due to claims of drugs offences. There were also 2 accusations of fraud. A man who killed 3 people in a spate of attacks in Nottingham has had his not guilty plea accepted on the grounds of diminished responsibility due to mental illness. 32-year-old Valdo Calacane, also known as Adam Mendez, instead pled guilty to manslaughter in November. He killed university students Barnaby Webber and Grace O'Malley Coomer and school caretaker Ian Coates in June last year. He also admitted to trying to murder 3 pedestrians who were hit by a van on the morning of the attacks. Rishi Sunak says the UK will work with Belgium to combat people smuggling gangs as he welcomed his counterpart to Downing Street today. Alexander De Croo praised Britain as a good neighbour, with the 2 leaders pledging to tackle illegal migration with increased cooperation. The Belgian leader said he looked forward to working with the UK in what he described as a first-of-a-kind law enforcement partnership. Another storm sweeping across Britain, bringing fresh disruption for commuters just a day after Storm Isha. The Met Office says Storm Jocelyn will bring strong winds, with amber and yellow alerts issued for much of the country. Yellow warnings for rain and ice are also in place across northern and eastern parts of Scotland. TransPennine Express is among several train operators warning of disruption. It's urging passengers to avoid travelling between England and Scotland from 3 o'clock this afternoon. Now, the so-called Barbenheimer phenomenon is dominating this year's Oscars, with an atomic bomb epic up against a film about a doll in the battle for Best Picture. The nominations for the 96th Academy Award include 13 nods for Oppenheimer by British director Christopher Nolan, with Cillian Murphy up for Best Actor against Bradley Cooper for Maestro. His co-star Carey Mulligan's also nominated for her performance in the Leonard Bernstein biopic. Barbie features strongly in other categories too, though there was an upset with Margot Robbie missing out on a gong for Best Actress. And Donald Trump says he expects his last remaining Republican opponent to drop out after today's New Hampshire primary. Polls point to a likely victory for the former president, but Nikki Haley's exit is not guaranteed. The affluent northeastern state has a large number of independent voters, and the former UN ambassador has gained support over recent months. Those are your top stories on GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now back to Ben and Emily.
Welcome back. It's 2:07. You're with Ben and Emily on Good Afternoon Britain. Forgot the name of the show then.
You are indeed. Good afternoon, Britain. Fill it in. Someone emailed me saying good morning. It's good afternoon.
I'll do it all the time, don't worry. Now, let's turn our attention stateside, because Donald Trump is set to go head-to-head with his last remaining Republican opponent, Nikki Haley, in New Hampshire. It comes as Florida Governor Ron DeSantis announced he was stepping down from the race over the weekend and joining the Trump train to endorse the former president.
Yes, indeed. He's got behind Donald Trump. Now, the contest follows former President Trump's landslide win in Iowa, which prompted many onlookers to ask the question, could he do it again?
Let's now speak to former White House Director of Communications under Donald Trump, Anthony Scaramucci. Good afternoon to you, Anthony. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm a big fan of your work, and I'll ask you later on about the Bitcoin ETF as well, because that's a pet love of mine. But let's first of all get stuck into Donald Trump, the Republican race, and your history with the former president, because when you were the White House communications chief, Anthony, at your first press briefing to reporters, you said that you loved the mission that the president was on and that you were a big fan of him and you were very loyal to him. So my question to you, sir, is what happened to your loyalty?
Ben, are you married?
Yes.
You are? Okay. You haven't been through a divorce yet, though, right?
Not yet. There's still time.
Okay. All right. Well, hopefully it'll never happen to you. Hopefully you stay married forever. But, you know, sometimes people get divorced. They can get divorced from a marriage, or they can get divorced from a business relationship, or from a political relationship. And so what happens in a situation like that, things change, and you start to make an observation of somebody. And yes, there are parts of Mr. Trump's mission that I actually believe in. I grew up in a blue-collar family, and I believe that there's a good 20% of the United States that feels disenfranchised. 20% of the country, frankly, went from aspirational working class to economically desperational. So, but that doesn't negate what Mr. Trump is doing as it relates to the U.S. Constitution. It doesn't negate what he's doing as it relates to the insurrection, the election interference. And let me just make one last point. There are 20 cabinet members that work for Mr. Trump closely and directly alongside of myself. Now, granted, I was there for 11 days, but I did work for him for close to a year on the campaign. And we all saw the same thing, and we were all speaking out against his temperament to be the president of the United States. So things do change. Facts change, and smart people change their opinion when the facts change.
Well, Anthony, you may have Donald Trump may have lost your support entirely, but that's there's a difference between not supporting Donald Trump for president and supporting and backing President Joe Biden.
Well, you only got two choices. I mean, you know, unfortunately, the United States has decided to put up Joe Biden and Donald Trump. And so you have two choices. I'm choosing the person that's going to preserve the American institutions of the democracy and the American system. Mr. Trump has already said that he doesn't want to do that. He wants to be dictator for a day. He wants to expand the executive powers. He wants to persecute. He wants to use what has typically been an agnostic Justice Department, but he wants to use that to persecute his political adversaries. This is not stuff that the UK, the rest of the world, our European allies, our global allies will think highly of once he's in office. And so I'm speaking out against it. He's not going to win, by the way, which is totally fine. People can say whatever they want, but I submit to you rhetorically, name me one person that didn't vote for Trump in 2020 that's all of a sudden saying, okay, yeah, I'm ready to vote for the guy. It's just not going to happen. And the demographics of the country and the beautiful, colorful mosaic of the country have changed dramatically since 2016 and 2020. So
you don't think he's capable of expanding his support at all?
No chance. There's no chance. And if you look at the polling numbers demographically, his support base is shrinking because, frankly, the population of white people is shrinking. And so, no, there's no chance. He doesn't have that in his personality, by the way. He's too divisive of a guy. But listen, it'll be a fun year. Hopefully you'll invite me back during the course of the year. It'll be a fun year to watch this thing unfold. But he's got no chance. And I understand why the press is ginning up a potential return of Mr. Trump, but it's just not going to happen.
Anthony, can you not be slightly generous and give President Trump some credit? He was the no-war president, as he's been dubbed. Potentially, he said that he would solve the Ukraine-Russia conflict within a day. The stock market was booming under his watch until COVID reared its head. I mean, he wasn't a totally awful president, was he?
Ben, time out. Let's go over each one of those things. He also said he was going to balance the U.S. budget in 4 years. He added $7.8 trillion to the budget. You know he can't solve the Ukraine problem in a day. You also know that he slowed down the arms and material to the Ukraine. Since 1994, the United States, in exchange for the Ukraine giving up their nuclear weapons, developed something called Operation Porcupine, where they fortified the Ukrainians with anti-tank, anti-ballistic missiles, etc., to protect the Ukrainian people from the Russian Federation. Mr. Trump slowed all of that stuff down. So when you say he's not the war president, in many ways, if you ask people in the Pentagon, if you can get them to come on your show, they'll tell you the actions that he took during his presidency contributed to Vladimir Putin thinking it was an easy way to strike the Ukrainians. So you want to go to the stock market. The stock market has never done better than during the Biden administration. And since the three of us are talking and getting along nicely, he mishandled the pandemic. We lost 21.5 million jobs during the pandemic.
Yeah,
I
agree with you on that.
I will give the president credit for recognizing, in the same way you guys had a Brexit, there's a very large group of people in the United States that feel left out and they feel disenfranchised. And I'm upset that the establishment politicians are not helping those people. Mr. Trump represents those people. He's an avatar for their anger, but he has not once put forth one policy idea to help those people. He did cut taxes for the rich, and I certainly benefited from that. But he hasn't really helped the people I grew up with, if you're going to be totally honest and objective about it.
So, Anthony, you clearly think a second term for Donald Trump would be an absolute disaster. What about a second term for Joe Biden? What would that look like?
Well, listen, like I said, I'm more interested. I'm a patriot first and a partisan second. I'm more interested in preserving the American democracy and the decentralized nature of the American government and the separations clause in our Constitution, which has basically led to a very flat society, less aristocratic society, more meritocratic. I've certainly, my family has benefited from the flatness of that government and the lack of that sort of status and class stuff that does not happen here in the United States. And so, it's a placeholder for 4 years until we can find hopefully younger people that want to take on the challenges that America and the world is facing. I don't like the fact that the combined age of these two candidates is 159 years old. I don't think it's fair to the American public or to the world, but this is the choices that we're faced with. These are aging baby boomers, or in Joe Biden's case, he's older than a baby boomer, that don't want to leave the stage. And frankly, I wish they would. But since they're not going to leave the stage and we have two choices, I'm going with the one that preserves the American democracy.
Anthony, you mentioned about, upholding the institutions of the United States. I mean, Republicans would argue that Donald Trump has been persecuted by Biden's weaponized DOJ. Mar-a-Lago was raided. He's been indicted. He's been arrested. What do you have to say to those Republicans who would push back with that argument?
Very respectful to, I guess these guys are Republicans. I mean, I'm still a Republican, but be very respectful to them and just point out, number one, he moved the documents into the bathroom in his mansion. After he moved the documents, we lost about 30 human intelligence agents on the ground. There's no coincidence to that, Ben. Second thing I would tell those people is that Mark Meadows is the chief witness for the prosecution on the insurrection. This is not a democratically elected DA. This is the former head of the Freedom Caucus, a white Southerner that was the former chief of staff of the president of the United States. He's the chief witness against them. So I get the talking points, but there's also facts that can't be obfuscated by the talking points. So with all due respect to them, now, if you want to ask me about the case in New York, I'm not a big fan of that case. I think that there's deleterious facts in that case. And I do think that that case is unfair to the president. But the insurrection case and the documents case, I mean, come on, guys. You can't take the documents out of the White House and then have your agents in the field die and expect there to be not any repercussions.
Okay, great stuff. Well, look, Anthony, I'm going to ask you one more question. I've been involved in Bitcoin since pretty much the start, and I was very pleased, but also bittersweet to see the ETFs launched in America last week. You've gone from a decentralized consensus to all the big boys like BlackRock getting involved. Very, very briefly, please, because we're pushed for time. What's your thoughts on the ETFs, and is it a good thing for Bitcoin? And also, Trump, by the way, says that he's anti-CBDC.
Yeah, well, listen, there'll be $100+ billion in the combined Bitcoin ETFs, which will lead to Bitcoin getting to an all-time high before the end of the year. And remember, if it just has to retrace some of the aspects of gold, gold's got a $14 trillion market cap. If Bitcoin just gets to a 7, it's a 10x from here.
Yeah.
But Ben, you're showing your age, Ben, by owning Bitcoin. So, you're not below 30, are you?
Yeah, I mean, Anthony, I have absolutely no idea what any of that meant.
And actually, no, a lot of our viewers won't, so I apologise. But it's a fairly big thing, and Anthony here is a Wall Street OG, if you don't mind me saying.
And don't sell your Bitcoin, Ben. That's the big message. Okay, forget about Trump and Biden. Don't sell your Bitcoin.
I won't.
Well, there you go. You used your privilege as the presenter there, the interviewer there. Thank you very much for your time, Anthony Scaramucci there, former White House Director of Communications. Good to speak to you.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of his work. He's not just a Trump White House comms chief, but he's a Wall Street legend as well. He's a massive Republican Party donor. I don't agree completely.
Big finance guy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, coming up, the Prime Minister has defended UK airstrikes on the Houthi rebels overnight, saying he won't hesitate to take further action against the militant group if necessary. Are we being dragged into another conflict in the Middle East? You're watching Good Afternoon Britain on GB News.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubs and Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
to find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Right, it is 2:23, and earlier this afternoon the Prime Minister updated the House of Commons on the joint UK-US airstrikes against the Houthi rebels overnight as the militant group continues to attack commercial and military shipping in the Red Sea.
Yeah, Rishi Sunak added that he will not hesitate to take further action if necessary, but Iran has condemned the strikes as, quote, a strategic mistake. Now, it's interesting because Lord Cameron, the Foreign Secretary, he met the Iranians last week, and, I mean, I don't know why he did it, why they'd listen to him, but they said, Cameron said, stop arming the Houthi rebels. And you just wonder, how many airstrikes, how much intervention is it going to take for the Houthis to get the message? It doesn't look like it's happening just yet.
Yes, and Rishi Sunak did make the point that this isn't just military strikes alone. There also is a diplomatic strategy, also sanctions, talks, humanitarian aid, of course, to the Yemeni people too, who are suffering the civil war. But shall we speak again to GB News security editor Mark White? Mark, any updates on this?
No more updates on the news we reported a while back about these drones that were spotted. No indications yet that they have reached any target, so we don't know what's happened to that. It was a report that the UK Maritime Trade Operations Centre, which looks after security in terms of alerting merchant shipping to security issues in the Red Sea, Gulf of Aden, the Arabian Gulf, or Persian Gulf, whichever way you want to describe it. They had reported that these drones were spotted southwest off the coast of Yemen, and they were urging all shipping to be on the lookout. So we're clearly watching to see what exactly the Houthis do now in response to this latest round of strikes that involved the UK military for the first time since the 11th of January, when they joined the initial strikes with the Americans. After that, there was half a dozen very smaller scale strikes that were in response to the Houthis launching attacks on other shipping in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. But the Prime Minister said the reason that they wanted to go after the Houthis and these specific targets last night was because of intelligence assessments. They were gathering the best intelligence with a view to carry out strikes that would degrade the Houthis' capability to launch more strikes. What he said is that they're not capable, the UK really, or it's just not practical for the UK to launch strikes in response to every missile strike that the Houthis launch. But what we can expect perhaps going forward is more concerted airstrikes when they've got targets acquired that they are confident will be able to degrade the Houthis' ability to launch these missiles.
OK, great stuff. Security editor Mark White, thank you for your expertise, as always.
Interesting. Now, the UK is bracing for the 10th named storm of the season. The high winds and rain of Storm Jocelyn are making their way across the country.
The Met Office has issued a danger to life alert across parts of Scotland. That's partly due to flying debris, with other smaller warnings ready for areas of northern England. Let's cross now to Porthcawl in South Wales and speak to our reporter Jack Carson, who's out and about in the terrible weather. Oh, dearie me, Jack. Are you at risk of getting blown away there, Jack?
Oh, dear.
I feel like it. My trousers have turned into sails. I could probably go out on the water and make a dash for Bristol across from South Wales. But yeah, here in Porthcawl, particularly this wind over the past few hours since we've been here has really picked up. It was 12 o'clock today when that yellow weather warning from the Met Office for wind for this part of South Wales and the rest of Wales came into force. It comes into place, stays into place until afternoon on Wednesday. As you can see, it's really, really gusty here. Up to 40 to 50 miles an hour of wind are hitting this coastline currently. And of course, this isn't even the worst part of the UK, particularly in parts of Scotland. There's an amber warning for wind on the top western parts of Scotland for wind. It could reach up to 80 miles an hour. Now, that is, of course, significantly less than what we saw with Storm Isha, where we saw wind speeds of around 100 miles an hour. But the disruption that this is causing over the transport networks particularly is obviously quite huge. Avanti West Coast and TransPennine urging people not to travel between England and Scotland from around 3:30 today. Avanti West Coast advising their customers to avoid going anywhere north of Preston after that time, and telling people that are getting on the train from London to go to Glasgow to expect a very, very busy service. Now, we know trees have come down as well on roads across the country. That's been causing disruption as well. In one case, there was a greenhouse on the train tracks. And of course, we have yesterday, because of Storm Isha, those two people who have sadly passed away because of incidents caused by the weather and by the storm. Of course, that danger to life alert comes when you name a storm. It's the Jocelyn is the 10th named storm of the year, and of course if there's 2 more between now and August, it will become one of the busiest storm seasons. It's certainly the most active storm season that we have had so far in the UK, with it already being 10 storms. But as you can see here in Porthcawl, it's pretty windy at the moment.
Jack, you need to bend down and get behind that groin of the wall. You're about to...
Jack, you are a trooper. Remembering all of that, this is proper regional reporting. You're seeing.
Well, he's an award-winning reporter.
Yeah,
that's
he
why.
is an award-winning reporter, and you're looking very not flustered at all. Not flustered at all, Jack.
Thank you very much, thank you. Yeah, as I said, when we were in the car earlier, the wind was rocking the car, so that just shows the power that we've got in this wind force, particularly on these coastal areas. Inland should hopefully be a little bit better, but of course the Met Office are going to be watching this storm as it comes in from the Arctic over the next kind of 24 hours to check whether they will have to maybe increase those weather warnings from yellow to amber. Of course, with this level of wind speed, when you have that loose flying debris that's already maybe laying on the floor because of the impact of Storm Isha, that's what maybe is going to be the problem. The debris that's already been caused by that previous storm, this second storm now whipping up further problems. So the Met Office
Jack,
and of course
now get
local
inside,
fire
you
service and
absolute
police
maniac,
services.
Jack. Get inside, take cover. Like, I can't imagine there are many locals out and about.
What a trooper.
What a trooper.
Stay safe, Jack, please, won't you? Because on a serious note, we have had 2 deaths from Storm Isha. Yeah, keep up the good work. Great stuff.
Stay safe, indeed.
Now,
that was quite amusing. I shouldn't laugh, but it's quite comical.
You have to laugh at some of it. I know there is a serious side to it, but when you see a top reporter like Jack Carson getting stuck in like that, it's...
When his, what do you call it, his herd got very, very fast, didn't it, there?
Yeah, that's why he's an award-winning reporter, one of ours on GB News. Right, coming up, is it time to abolish the House of Lords? We'll be discussing that with our panel after your headlines with Tatiana.
Ben, thank you. It's 2:30. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. The Prime Minister says the UK will not hesitate to take further action in Yemen following a spate of attacks in the Red Sea. Rishi Sunak described attacks on commercial ships by the Iranian-backed militants as illegal and unacceptable. That comes after last night's joint strike with the US, which took place after a meeting with US President Joe Biden. Mr Sunak says new sanctions would be announced in the coming days and any further attacks will be deterred. A mass screening of more than 300,000 police officers, staff and volunteers has led to 9 criminal investigations. The review, carried out in the wake of Sarah Everard's murder by a serving officer, uncovered 461 cases in need of assessment. Most of the officers were ranked Chief Inspector or below, but one chief officer was found to need management action. One case involved alleged sexual offences, while another was due to claims of drug offences. There were also 2 accusations of fraud. A man who killed 3 people in a spate of attacks in Nottingham has had his not guilty plea accepted on the grounds of diminished responsibility due to mental illness. 32-year-old Valdo Calacane, also known as Adam Mendes, instead pled guilty to manslaughter in November. He killed university students Barnaby Webber and Grace O'Malley Coomer and school caretaker Ian Coates in June last year. He also admitted to trying to murder 3 pedestrians who were hit by a van on the morning of the attacks. Rishi Sunak says the UK will work with Belgium to combat people smuggling gangs as he welcomed the country's Prime Minister to Downing Street. Alexander De Croo praised Britain as a good neighbour, with the 2 leaders pledging to tackle illegal migration with increased cooperation. The Belgian leader said he looked forward to working with the UK in what he described as a first-of-a-kind law enforcement partnership. And another storm is sweeping across Britain, bringing fresh disruption for commuters just a day after Storm Isha. The Met Office says Storm Jocelyn will bring strong winds, with amber and yellow alerts issued for much of the country. Yellow warnings for rain and ice are also in place across northern and eastern parts of Scotland. You can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious?
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubs and Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on this Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 2:37. You're with Ben and Emily on Good Afternoon Britain. Rishi Sunak's Rwanda plan suffered its first defeat in the House of Lords yesterday when peers, unelected peers, some would say, voted by 214 to 171 not to ratify the agreement.
Yes, the unelected chamber has been accused of acting against the will of the people by some people. Some are saying that peers are purposefully torpedoing or attempting to the Prime Minister's Rwanda plan. So we're going to ask, is it time to abolish the House of Lords? With us is the former editor of the Sunday Express, Martin Townsend, and the former Labour advisor, Matthew Laza. Interested to get your views on this one. We had a bit of a punchy debate earlier between Lord Sean Bailey and Neil Hamilton.
He called him elitist, didn't he? Hamilton called Sean an elitist.
Yeah, I think
he's the least elitist Lord.
It's quite a hard charge against Sean. There are other things you can criticise Sean for.
Well, now he's part of the elite. I mean, if being a Lord doesn't make you part of the elite...
Lord Bailey of Paddington.
Well, there you go. So
yeah, Lord Bailey of the very manner that we're sat in GB News studios. You know.
Now, a lot of people on the left have been very critical of the House of Lords, particularly, you know, when they look at it in theory. They don't think it's very fair that it's unelected. Yet, I imagine that they've changed their view, because it seems to me that the House of Lords is potentially on their side. We saw quite a lot of delaying going on in the Brexit debate, and it would appear that many peers would like to see the back of this Rwanda bill?
Yeah, I think it's a tough one because you're going to see suddenly lots of converts to the House of Lords tweeting away today with their support because of the defeat for the government. But the truth of the matter is, the Lords is an anachronism. It's a bit of a sort of half-done job because Tony Blair's government got rid of all but 92 of the hereditary peers. And then, of course, because there are no rules about what you do then, and Prime Ministers can create as many as they like, we've seen the situation where the Tories have created more peers than any other government in history of either party. And you've got this ridiculously oversized chambers. You were saying earlier, they can't all meet together. It's the largest, second largest, I think, chamber in the world after the Chinese communists,
and their population is what?
And their population is somewhat larger. So, so something has to be done. It can't carry on as it is. And one danger is there's a lot of pressure on Keir Starmer. Will he create 100 or 150 peers when he is? They might get so desperate they have to ask me. Wasn't
Starmer once pro-abolishing the Lords?
So it's actually official Labour policy to abolish it. It has been for... Yeah.
Is he going to stick to that, Marcel?
Well, that's the big question.
Well, I hope not. I really hope not, because I think it's an essential part of our democracy. I think it's very good to have a second chamber that puts in the checks and balances. I also have some.
You'll be elected. You have an elected Senate.
I also have. It's not the same. I'm sorry, it's not the same. And I have some sympathy with your view earlier, actually, Emily, about the hereditary peers. I've never seen a problem with that particularly, because I think the whole idea is it should be random. It should be fairly random. OK, these people are all from, maybe it's not random and maybe I'm going too far. But I think what I like about it is if it's packed with Tories, packed with Labour, it doesn't really work. But I think if it's a mixture of people, and certainly it's not 800 peers deciding on Rwanda, it will be some who would want to sort of get involved in that debate. I think, as Sean Bailey said earlier, the whole point about it, and particularly in this case, I think, is Rwanda is a really flawed bill. I'm totally against it. I think it's going to be a field day for lawyers. And I think basically what the Lords were saying is let's have a really good look at this before we put it out there, because there are loads of lawyers rubbing their hands together. There's going to be endless appeals. It's going to be an endlessly fraught process. I'm absolutely against Rwanda bill. I think it's impractical. It's not going to work. It's not going to deal with enough cases. And I think there's much better ways of doing it. And funnily enough, for about 5 minutes, I think Keir Starmer said that he was more in favour of actually going after the traffickers, which is my view. I think that's the way to go.
There's a difference, though, between suggesting tweaks to a bill, knowing well and accepting well that the government has the democratic right to put through their legislation, whether you like it or not, and trying to take a wrecking ball to it. Do you believe that maybe the House of Lords may wish to do that?
No, I genuinely think that they are examining what has been a really flawed and fraught piece of legislation to make sure that it can be as robust as it can be. I personally think they're never going to make it robust enough.
Yeah.
And so, as I say, in this particular case, I'm absolutely on their side. But I think countless times we've seen over the years, the House of Lords acts as a really good second chamber, a kind of as Sean Bailey was saying, for scrutiny. And I think that's really important.
Yeah.
Matthew, can't we just... I mean, this Lords amendment, the government doesn't have to listen to it, do they? Can't we just... No. Or can't Sunak just say, nah, you're OK, thank you?
Yeah, I mean, they can reverse any of the amendments in the Commons. And in terms of stopping the bill, the Labour peers have been quite clear they're not going to attempt to do that because they don't want to thwart the will of the elected chamber. So there is a limit to what you can do. So if we want a revising second chamber, because the Lords is unelected, there is always that natural break on what they can do. So Labour's proposal is to have an elected second chamber, and it would be based outside.
I'm not sure I see the point of that. We already elect our MPs to represent us. I'm not sure we need an elected second chamber.
America, everybody else has got it.
Well, we don't have to be like everyone else, do we? I mean, in theory, I'm supportive of the House of Lords. I think in practice, however, with the various political appointees...
I mean, it's quite nice. It's a bit of character to the country, isn't it? You've got Lords parading around. But really, if you ask the...
much more than that. It's a really important house. I think it is, yeah, really important.
Do you think perhaps it's a bit bloated? Do you think maybe it's a bit bloated, i.e. there are too many?
800 is pushing it.
But you've got people with all
300 quid a day,
people with all kinds of specialities, people with all different interests. I mean, I've known some really good Lords over there. Lord Alley, for instance, I thought did some brilliant work in there. And there are lots of people that I really admire have done brilliant work in the House of Lords.
I think people want free thinkers. in there.
Yeah.
And the political allegiances upset that.
Then they can't complain when the government gets voted against, though. It's a balance, isn't it?
Yeah.
If you want free thinkers, they're not always going to toe the government line, and that's why you see governments of all stripes get defeated when there's a particular headstrong, particularly from the independent members.
I think for a lot of people, the whole Brexit debacle sort of coloured the House of Lords a little.
It's certainly...
For people, whether you were in favour or against
people don't want unelected officials dictating how laws are made in this country. That's what Brexit was about. That's why we got rid of Brussels. You've got 800 of them nearly in the laws.
Then you need an elected second chamber, which, the Labour's solution.
I mean,
my best moment was when we were doing a Labour conference, a regional conference in Blackpool, and we had to think of a story, so we decided, we can come to Blackpool. I think at the moment there isn't an official designation of where it would be. Maybe York is thought of.
Well, I mean, Tony Blair loved his constitutional reforms, so perhaps Keir Starmer will do the same.
Maybe.
He's
as you said, I didn't know that, actually, that's Labour policy to reform the Lords or abolish them?
To abolish it and have an elected Senate.
Well,
people would still be called Lords.
I think they have to be very careful.
No, it would be outside London.
Goodness me.
I think they have to be really careful about that.
Yeah, I think so too. We don't want to bulldoze our institutions without thinking about whether the alternative is actually better. But anyway, earlier we spoke to former White House Director of Communications Anthony Scaramucci about the chances of a Donald Trump win in the US election. Comes as Nikki Haley says the New Hampshire vote this evening is not a coronation for the former president.
Matthew Larzer, Scaramucci, some would say he's bitter. He was sacked by Donald Trump after 10 days in the White House, and now he's just on a campaign to get his...
It was even shorter than Liz Truss's premiership as political 10 years ago.
Yes, that lettuce would still be...
The extraordinary thing is, Scaramucci is now backing Biden over Trump. I mean, that's...
No, I think it's because he's worried about the future of our world. I mean, Biden has got many qualities. Clearly, there are also some serious issues with Biden as president as well. And frankly, I think from our perspective in the UK, a sort of battle of the I'm going to put it politely, older gents is not particularly encouraging. But I mean, I'm really worried about what a Trump presidency would mean for the world.
He was the no-war president.
But he was the no-war president because nothing happened on his watch.
Because he
by
ensured
accident, not by design. No.
He was the first US leader to meet the North Korean leader in the demilitarised zone.
And then he did the exact opposite. He took the mickey out of him by carrying on with his tests.
Well, that's how he did it. That's how he did it, with threats and with humour. He said people got the message. You're not going to.
How much intel have the Ukrainians got on him? And the Russians got on him.
But what was interesting that Scaramucci said? He said that Donald Trump has not expanded his voter base. Yes, he has a very enthusiastic voter base, but he won't have enlarged it.
Does it matter? I mean, if he gets...
He says because of demographics,
the system
so he won't win, he says.
Oh, I absolutely doubt that. I think Donald Trump, if he is going to go all the way and win, definitely. What I find really depressing is coming back to your two elderly gentlemen. I mean, America is such a vibrant nation. Why aren't there two younger people fighting this?
Well, you've got Vivek Ramaswamy, who's
it's just extraordinary that these two. I mean, it's just like when will they go away? When will they actually disappear and give somebody else a chance? I think in Britain we find it really... I just find it really difficult to think that is the best they can come up with.
Do you think there's an arrogance there? It's not... Well, obviously there's a bit of an arrogance there. These people are, fighting out to be the President of the United States, but wanting to cling on despite... that age.
There is a sort of arrogance there. I mean, to be honest, I have slightly fewer reservations about Trump being president than other people do, because I think in practice, as you were saying earlier, Ben, I think there were good things about Trump. There are a lot of bad things, but a lot of good. But that's the same with every president, really. I don't think there's any wholly brilliant president that we've ever had, frankly.
I wanted to hit back at Anthony Scaramucci when he said that his white vote was diminishing. Actually, I'm of the argument.
He said there were fewer white people as a proportion of the electorate, so therefore. Trump was going to lose votes.
In 2016, he won the biggest share of the Hispanic and black vote out of any other Republican president in history. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, he increased that share in 2020 when he lost to Biden. So I don't think he's just relying on the white vote.
Well, that's true. There is an issue, actually, for right-wing parties to tend to have an older demographic, an older voter base, including the Tories. One Tory strategist told me the other day what percentage of 2019 Tory voters have died every year. And it's a rather grim...
And do you know what the problem with the Tories is? As a Conservative,
What, the problem?
you want to, well, one of the problems, you want to conserve something. People these days aren't buying houses, they're not having families because they're skint and haven't got houses. So
after 14 years, the Tories
younger voters have nothing to conserve.
Exactly. So I mean, it was an awful thing. But you remember when there was the talk of the second referendum, the pro-European lobby hopes that it might win because of demographic changes. It's politely put.
People are still buying houses. Yes, the age at which one purchases a house has gone up.
Well, it's becoming a very hard
But people
task.
are. I mean, outside of the southeast, people are still being able to get on the property.
I think a lot of young people
It's a struggle.
don't feel they have a proper stake in this nation.
Yeah.
I honestly don't.
And that's tough for the Tories.
And I think that's... well, it's not just down to the Tories.
No, but it's tough for the Tories electorally because, as you say...
It's definitely tough for the Tories because I think traditionally Tories, you vote Tory because you have something to lose.
Yeah.
If you've got nothing to lose, then you vote Labour.
I mean, you've got the same debates going on in the States and Australia and other European countries, younger people not being able to get on the housing ladder, not starting families as a result of not having
It's not just about that, though, Emily. It's not just about not being able to get on the housing ladder. It's a general feeling, I think, of disaffection. A lot of young people just don't feel that they're properly represented. They just feel they get.
Well, I think a lot of older people feel like that.
Well, they do, but I think it's a problem. It's a real problem when young people feel like that because they are the future, basically. And I just think those people that don't feel they have a. Well, they are kind of, yeah.
It used to be that you were sort of more left-leaning during university, and then you'd go into the workplace and you'd understand really how the world works. Instead of just through your rose-tinted student spectacles.
But now, the average age of a Tory voter is now something is basically in their 60s.
Is that true?
Yeah. So the age is now... It's not class. I think age alongside education are the two... The higher education has a big impact, are the two biggest determiners of how you'd vote.
But is this according to polls, though?
No, I think that's according
because
to
people don't
studies.
tell the truth. They never tell the truth.
I think according to academic studies...
Young Tories are never going to say I'm voting
No,
Tory.
I think they take that into account. Yeah, I mean, and
the polls are always wrong, aren't they?
Do you know what? I think some of the younger generation may actually be quite conservative.
So you've got hope.
There's been a little backlash against the excesses of the wokery in that.
Yeah, there's a lot of Olivia Rutleys out there, definitely. I can tell you that. There are.
Just going back to the US...
God bless her, by the way.
We went down.
No, it was great. It's a fascinating conversation. But just going back to the US, what would a Trump presidency mean for Britain? Because I keep saying this, but the Daily Telegraph had an interesting story a few weeks back saying ministers were quietly hoping that we get a Trump win because we get a trade deal. Joe Biden, of course, has snubbed us one. And Boris Johnson over the weekend in his Daily Mail column said that, echoed what I said. I mean, great minds think alike, eh? But he said that the world would be a more peaceful place with Trump in charge. What would it mean for Britain?
I totally disagree, because I think that NATO, which is the importance of which we've seen more than ever over the last 2 or 3 years, would be in real danger. He's an isolationist. He wants to pull back from the world.
Well, he has threatened in the past to stop giving money towards NATO, but that was in order to try and get other countries to stop.
Which is a perfectly legitimate aim, but it's one thing to call their bluff. Sadly, and it is the Europeans' fault. A lot of countries haven't increased their military spending, in particular Germany, which is the sleeping power when it comes to defence.
There are worries, of course, about the US's position on Ukraine.
Yes, there are. But I actually, and that was a concern for me. I look at the idea of a Trump presidency, actually, and I actually don't think he would go that far. I don't think he would pull out.
He says he'd end the conflict in a day.
Yeah, well, that's
good luck with that. Well, I mean, it's bluster. And he's going to be a dictator on day one. I actually worry for the future democracy in the United States.
No, I don't.
Come on.
Can we squeeze in one more story? Do we have time?
Go on then.
Do we have time?
Yes.
This is the gender pay gap stuff. Which I think a lot of it's quite nonsensical, but anyway. Civil servants have told employers to collect gender pay gap figures based on how their workers identify rather than their biological sex, the Telegraph can reveal, which sounds ludicrous to me, because you could change the way you identify and it might skew the graphs somewhat. But I want to ask, do you think we should even be forcing companies to publish this data? Is it a waste of time?
I just have to ask the question, why are we still talking about a gender pay gap?
Because there is one.
2023. Yeah, but there shouldn't be.
2024 now.
Exactly.
Absolutely should not
there isn't.
be. And it's just ridiculous that, in 2023 we shouldn't be having this debate about if someone does the same job as somebody else, they could be...
But that's different. That's equal pay. The gender pay gap is something quite different. And actually, it is the motherhood penalty, which some might not view as a penalty at all. And actually, men and women, same, and it only starts diverging once you get to baby years, breathing years.
I think it's we can have a serious debate about it, but we can only have it when we've got the facts. So yes, we should have gender pay audits, the gender pay gap audits, which every company over a certain size has to do. But clearly, they should be based upon the legal gender of the people involved. So obviously, if people have got a gender, if they've changed their gender legally, then that should be recognised. But it needs to be done in the legal gender.
It can be a bit misleading, though, because they said EasyJet, for example, has this massive gender pay gap because they're comparing pilots with air stewardesses, and of course there are more male pilots.
It gets us thinking about it.
You want equal opportunities, but that doesn't mean that the outcome is always going to be the same. You have to take into account, as you said, I mean, women are going to have babies. They're going to think about different career prospects and ways of dealing with their lives. So I don't think it's just about as simple as pay you the same as you, because you want to give people equal opportunities, but the outcomes are always going to be different.
Yeah, women want equal opportunities. They may make different choices.
If one man's being paid more...
But we need to know... That's why we had to do the audit, because we need to have the figures in order to make those decisions.
Yes, as long as those figures are fairly...
I mean, I don't think there'll be enough people on this who will skew the figures unduly, but it just doesn't a bit daft. I mean, it's how Scotland mucked up its census as well.
Well, thank you very much indeed for your time, Matthew Larzer, and of course Martin Townsend. Thank you. You've been a fantastic panel.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. Keep those emails coming in tomorrow. We're back again. Martin Daubney is next with a cracking show. Don't miss it. Thanks for joining us.
Yes, stay.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. It's a wet and windy day out there. Disruptive winds overnight as Storm Jocelyn moves in. Now, Storm Jocelyn, coming just 2 days after Storm Isha, is going to cause further impacts because of the ongoing repair and recovery work. But it is a notch down on what we saw with Storm Isha. I think overnight, the northern two-thirds of the UK seeing gusts of 50, 60 miles an hour. And for the north and west of Scotland, the risk of 80-mile-per-hour wind gusts. So not quite as strong as Isha, but the potential for some significant impacts nevertheless. We're going to see the rain turn to showers overnight. The heaviest downpours will be affecting Scotland and Northern Ireland. Further south, some clear spells. Nevertheless, a blustery start for all of us as we begin Wednesday. Some decent bright weather out there, and the winds do start to decrease through the morning and early part of the afternoon. We'll see further showers across Scotland, some thunderstorms here and there, but actually there'll be some sunshine in between. And for many, it's a fine start to the afternoon. But for Wales and the southwest, some rain turns up by the end of the afternoon here, and it's going to be a mild day for all of us. Now, Thursday starts off with the rain I mentioned there, just moving northeast across the country, a lot of cloud cover away from the northeast of Scotland, and increasingly breezy once again. Friday, we'll see a mix of sunny spells with some showers in the north. Saturday, more wind and rain.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show.
Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else.
We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride.
Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse.
It's news, but it's this close to entertainment.
Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubs and Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, it's 3 p.m. Welcome to the Martin Dilby Show on GB News, broadcasting live from the heart of Westminster, all across the UK. On today's show, despite the fact that Rishi Sunak urged the Lords not to frustrate the will of the people and not oppose the government's Rwanda plan, guess what? As we predicted from the very beginning, the peers are already revolting. Today, I'll be asking the big question, is it time to scrap the House of Lords? And the UK and US carried out a second round of airstrikes in Yemen last night. But are we in danger of being sucked into another Middle East conflict? And a day after Storm Isha hit the UK, many parts of the country are suffering from the effects of Storm Jocelyn. We'll have all the latest. And the man who stabbed 3 people to death in Nottingham last year has pleaded guilty to manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility due to serious mental health illnesses. That's all coming in the next hour. So welcome to the show and thank you for joining me as ever. Now, I want to hear from you today. The big debate is it time to junk the House of Lords? We knew they were going to oppose Rwanda, just as they did with Brexit. History is repeating itself. Is it just their job to frustrate the will of the people? Is it time to get rid of these unelected elites? Email me your views, gbviews@gbnews.com. But first, it's time for your news headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Martin, thank you. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister says the UK will not hesitate to take further action in Yemen following a spate of attacks in the Red Sea. Rishi Sunak described attacks on commercial ships by the Iranian-backed militants as illegal and unacceptable. It comes after last night's joint strike with the US, which took place after a meeting with US President Joe Biden. Mr Sunak says new sanctions would be announced in the coming days and any further attacks will be deterred.
We are not seeking a confrontation. We urge the Houthis and those who enable them to stop these illegal and unacceptable attacks. But if necessary, the United Kingdom will not hesitate to respond again in self-defence. We cannot stand by and allow these attacks to go unchallenged. Inaction is also a choice.
The Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says his party backs the government in its action.
Labour said we will judge further action on the Houthis on a case-by-case basis. So let me be clear, we back this targeted action to reinforce maritime security in the Red Sea. The Houthi attacks must stop. They are designed to destabilise us, so we must stand united and strong. They bring danger to ordinary civilians working hard at sea, so we must protect them.
A man who killed 3 people in a spate of attacks in Nottingham has had his not guilty plea accepted on the ground of diminished responsibility due to mental illness. 32-year-old Valdo Calacane, also known as Adam Mendez, instead pled guilty to manslaughter in November. He killed university students Barnaby Webber and Grace O'Malley Coomer and school caretaker Ian Coates in June last year. He also admitted to trying to murder 3 pedestrians who were hit by a van on the morning of the attacks. Fresh warnings are being issued over an alarming rise in measles across Europe. The World Health Organization says the spread of the disease has accelerated in recent months, with a more than 30-fold rise. A study by Oxford University found that disinformation is part of the problem, with 1 in 5 Brits saying they think vaccine data is fake. Officials say the decline in maintaining routine childhood vaccinations is concerning. Now, new research suggests a simple blood test could be just as effective at detecting Alzheimer's disease as current practices, which are often painful and invasive. Experts say measuring levels of a particular protein in blood samples could be an even better way to detect the condition than other tests currently in development. Doctors say the findings have the potential to revolutionise the experience of people who are suspected to be suffering from the disease. The Met Office is warning of strong winds and heavy rain across the whole of the UK as another storm sweeps in. Storm Jocelyn's